Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Thursday, everybody. Another week of the offseason is coming to a close, but not before we had the chance to talk about some Notre Dame defensive tackles today, Brian. That's what's on the docket. We're going to break down just really the overview look of the Notre Dame defensive tackle room, keeping up with our preview of the position rooms. Last week, I believe, or a couple weeks ago, days are starting to blend together. We talked about the Notre Dame defensive ends. Now it's time to turn our attention to the interior of the defensive line. And then today, we're also going to talk about, what Charlie Partridge's impact is going to be. We're going to give a breakdown of the room, up-and-comers, vets coming in. Obviously, we're going to highlight the transfer players as well. And then we're going to wrap everything up by talking about what we think will be the top 10 defensive tackle or defensive line units in the country at the end of the regular season, really more projection moving forward. And then we are going to have a mailbag today, folks. So Travis Bisel holds glasses. Already got a head start. Got a mailbag question in there, so feel free to go ahead and throw some in as the show goes on. But Brian, we have another awesome show today. I'm ready to talk some Notre Dame football and talk some defensive tackles because this is a position group that's probably pretty underrated on the national scale, but poised for a big season.
I think that's been true for several years, Trev. I think we could look at the defensive tackles at Notre Dame for the last 2-3 seasons and say that for the most part, they're very underrated nationally. And, look, you had an All-American in 2023 in Howard Cross. Riley Mills was pretty good that season as well, especially second half of the year. 2024, Riley Mills has an All-American season, back-to-back years with All-Americans. So, there's clearly not being completely overlooked, but I think while there's been some All-American status, Riley Mills made like one All-America team. He should have made more, and then you look at the ability of this defensive, tackle group to kind of overcome injuries and guys going down the last couple of years. This past year was the healthiest the D tackle room has been. They only lost one guy, really for any period of time. You know what I mean? Now, Donovan Hinish played through injury and Jared Dawson played through some injuries. But as far as like losing guys, Gabriel Rubio going down, it's like the only guy you had. You're like, wow, it's a pretty clean year. That's college football. You're going to lose a guy. But, and I thought the D tackle room performed extremely well this season as a unit. Now, what this year's D tackle room missed is they didn't have that Riley Mills type of game changer. And Jared Dawson, I thought, was their best D tackle, but he was their best of a group of pretty good players, pretty solid players. There was no like, hey, that guy's an All-American. It was just a bunch of solid players, and it seemed like every week there was somebody new stepping up to perform. I think that lack of star power is partly why the D-line is the D tackle room, and even the D-line as a whole is being underrated. I'll be willing to bet you good money. And I won't give away where we have them ranked. Trevor and I have the Notre Dame D-line ranked in the same exact spot, coming, in our top 10 rankings. I'll be willing to bet you that we are a lot higher on them than a lot of people are going to be. And a lot of that's because I think there is the lack of star power at defensive tackle that they've had. And the fact that I still think the defensive end room is a little bit underrated as well. And I think that also impacts how another team's D-line is perceived, because they got a guy from Notre Dame, which we'll talk about. But I think the D tackle room has been underrated. But I'll also say this. There was enough recruiting misses in previous years that it was a giant question mark going into the offseason. Giant question mark. You lose Jared Dawson. In the last 2 years, they've lost Howard Cross, Riley Mills, Jared Dawson, Gabriel Rubio, and Donovan Hinish. It's a lot of what your group was in 2024. You've got Elijah Hughes coming back and Jason Onye coming back. I don't believe any of the D tackles played for Notre Dame in the playoffs in 2024. I don't believe. Elijah Hughes wasn't on the team. Jason Onye was no longer on the team. So just 2 quick years, all your D tackles that played for you in the playoffs in 2024 are all gone. Now, you had guys on the roster, but none that played. So you've had to kind of remake it. And then Armel Mukam jumps in the portal. So it's been a very interesting offseason, Trevor, for the defensive tackle room, because when you and I first started talking about the D-line, or the team really as a whole going into the offseason, the D tackle room was the biggest question mark and the biggest concern for this football team. And
kind of by a lot.
Yes, exactly. Other than kicker,
Yeah,
You know what I mean? I don't know if
Yeah.
there's a bigger question mark on the team, and that's a great point, Trev, by a lot. And then Armel Mukam jumps in the portal, and it becomes an even bigger question mark. And then the portal process gets off to a bit of a rough start, and we're like, "But this sucker's going to end up, really hurting his team." Next thing you know, boom, Francis Brew's on board, Tion Gray's on board. Starts with Armel Mukam comes back. And then now you're looking at it and saying, okay, now this room, I believe, is even more talented than last year's room. We'll see how it stacks up to the 2024 room. I still don't know if there's a Riley Mills in this group, but there's a bunch of really good players in this group. And now all of a sudden, I look at it and I say, Trev, I think this is a strength of the team now. The D tackle room and then the D line as a whole. What a wild month and a half it has been when you look at the evolution of this room.
Oh, I mean, it's been crazy. Last week of December, first week of January, we're talking about, I guess, if you can get one of the Mateen kid from Wake Forest, or you get the transfer from Penn State, or you get Francis Brew, and then we can start having a conversation of, okay, is this group going to be good? But the evolution quickly went from, is this group going to be good, to how good can this group be? And that's a really good spot to be in when you're trying to build a championship caliber roster. The thing that stands out to me about the personnel in this, and I'm not going to get too much into the weeds about it because we're going to dive into it here in a little bit, but it's the diversity of skill sets that are now in the room as well. One big thing that I've seen from Notre Dame's defensive tackle rotations over the last couple of years is, even as dominant as they were in parts of 23 and Riley Mills in 24, you kind of just had like one or two body types. You had Riley Mills and like Gabe Rubio and Jason Onye, or Howard Cross. And that was kind of everybody that was involved in the rotation. And now you have players that kind of fulfill that, Howard Cross type skill set, like a Francis Brew, it's kind of like an Elijah Hughes. Then you still have Jason Onye on the roster. You have guys like Christopher Burgess coming up. So all of that combined, there's been so much movement with this group. Oh, and by the way, on top of all of that, they had to replace their position coach along the way as well. So the personnel changes weren't just specific to who's strapping on the helmet and putting on the cleats. It's also who's getting everybody lined up and the person in charge of development. Been a lot of movement with Notre Dame's defensive tackle room, for sure.
It is interesting because it is going to look very different than what we saw last season. The most experienced guy coming back from this room after Jason Onye is Elijah Hughes, who a year ago was a newcomer as well. Very, very different looking room. And anytime you have this much changeover, Trevor, the optimism is there, in my opinion. I know it is for me. I know it is for you. I think it is for a lot of the fans. But anytime there is a bunch of new, it at least, you have to at least be honest to say, okay, there's still some unknown here. Yeah, we think they're going to be this. We think they're going to be that. But there's still a lot to prove with this unit, including just the guys that came over needing to. I mean, one of the big pickups that we'll talk about, Tion Gray, like, yeah, you want to get more from him. He even said it in his press conference. I want to get more from him. I want to do more. I want to play more. I want to produce more. I want to help more. And that was part of the reason that he transferred. Well, that means he's got to earn that, and he's got to show that he was worth it. And obviously, Francis Brew. I got to say this too, by the way. We haven't really talked about the press conference yesterday, and we're not going to really talk too much about it individually, but I was very impressed with Francis Brew and Tion Gray as young men and the way they handled the media in their first chance, especially Francis Brew. Like, he was outstanding. I mean, you look at his transcript, Trev, compared to everybody else's, there's like these big, long, thick paragraphs. He's giving you like these really good thought out answers. I'm like, a very talkative young man after my own heart. You know what I mean? Like, I love this kid. He's wordy. I like it. But just not what I expected him to be. You watch him play and you watch the kind of the meanness that he plays the game with and the fire he plays the game with. And then you talk to him like, this kid's like an intellectual. Like, this is a really smart kid. And it was just kind of, you're like, oh, now I get why he picked Notre Dame. Like, light goes on, like, oh, now I get it. That's why I picked Notre Dame. But like, he's the one guy that's kind of the proven guy that's coming back or that's going to be here, but he still has to show what he can do this year. But there's at least the question of, okay, yeah, there's some excitement, but there is still they got to prove it as a unit. How do they play well together? And then how does the room as a whole how are they impacted by the arrival of Charlie Partridge? That's the other part. In some ways, losing out Washington hurts because I'm a big fan of continuity in football, but I prefer it when there. But there, in another way, him leaving can be good for some players because there's going to be some players on the depth chart that are going to feel like, yeah, I wasn't going to play under Coach Washington. That's true for every coach who leaves. There's just some guys who weren't playing. And now guys like, maybe a Brennan Vernon or a Sean Savillano or somebody like that can say, hey, like new coach, new opportunity. Charlie Partridge said yesterday, I'm going to watch film with all these guys, but they all understand the depth chart's going to be determined by what you do for me moving forward. He said that very clearly at the beginning of his press conference yesterday. And I think that's important for this room as a whole to know, to say, hey, listen, yeah, I may have recruited you to Pitt and we recruited you to the portal and we recruited you out of the portal. And you're obviously a 6-year senior, play a lot and you're a highly ranked kid, but none of that means a hill of beans. What's going to determine who plays is what you do from now until the end of the season. And so I think that creates also a level of competition that could be healthy in that room as well, Trev, and say, okay, you think you've got this spot locked down. Okay, I got this cat number, what's he, number 6 now? Right? Isn't that what Chris Burgess is? He trained. Let me see here. He is number, actually, I got to update the numbers, but yeah, he changed his number this offseason. But it's either 9 or 6. I think it's 6. Yeah, because he took Christian Gray's number. But you look at it now, Trev, you're like, man, there's some cats breathing down your neck a little bit. So you better bring it. And that's something that to me has me excited. And that's where I think it could be a blessing that you have a new position coach, because everybody understands, hey, we're getting off to a completely fresh start. Everything that we saw in the past doesn't mean anything. We're going and I liked how he said it. They're going to watch film together with the players in the room, but it's going to be like more so learning about areas that they need to continue to get better, more so than like, okay, it's going to determine the depth chart. I like that. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, absolutely. That was one of the biggest things that I highlighted from his press conference yesterday when we got the transcript over. That, I mean, he got asked about, just it's a big group. It's a very deep defensive line rotation. And he talked about, this isn't coach speak. It really will be an evaluation that never stops ever. Mid-game, if there's someone that's not playing well, we'll flip. Bottom line is what those numbers should create with hopefully high-quality numbers is competition. I agree completely, and that's what you need. If you're sticking with the mantra of challenge everything and put your best on the field, and if a lot of the things that we've been talking about so far this offseason come to fruition of putting your best guys out there, being able to play matchup-based football. Bryan, you talk all the time about, this just isn't a great matchup for this team, or this team matches up well with this team. Well, what's the biggest way to avoid that? Being able to have multiple different skill sets and multiple different players that can match up with a variety of different teams that you're going to face. So that's why I appreciate that sentiment. And to your point, kind of getting fresh blood in there at the top down, it's going to kind of clean slate for everybody, and everybody now has a chance to prove. Now, obviously, there's going to be a foundation for everybody. When you pop in film, you're just going to see more film of Boubacar Traore and Bryce Young and what Keon Keeley did at Alabama, opposed to, what Ebenezer Utade and Rodney Dunham did. But bright side about the offseason, and honestly what makes this conversation so exciting, is the fact that it will be new. Uncertainty, there's 2 different ways that you can go about it. It's a little scary not knowing what a rotation is going to look like, or we get a lot of great questions in mailbags, but what is so-and-so stat line going to be for this to be a championship caliber insert position group here? And part of the scary part / exciting part is we get to watch all of that unfold. But Charlie Partridge is going to play a huge role in that. And I'm very, very interested to see how he handles this competition in the spring and the fall.
Trev, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I have to restart my computer.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on right now, but I got to restart my computer. So just kind of you can take it into the next part, and I'll be back in 2 minutes.
Well, all righty. Well, listen, at the end of the day, we have talked about Charlie Partridge coming in and being a factor in what is now going to be a new look defensive tackle room. A lot of different turnover. You're losing Al Washington. He steps in. He was the first assistant coach that was hired. So let's kind of get into what his impact is going to be. And let's sit down and talk about what we can expect from this type of room. And so when you go and you look at what Charlie Partridge, in my eyes, there's a couple of things that what his impact can be. And first and foremost, we've talked a lot on this show about what Notre Dame can be and what they were this last season in the run game. They had a very impressive run defense this past season. You go through and you look at what they did last year. Give me a second to get these numbers pulled up here. But it is a vast difference from what they did in 2024. This past season, they finished 11th in the country in total rushing yards allowed per game at 100.08. And in yards per attempt, Notre Dame finished 10th, allowing less than 3 yards per carry. It was 2.99. You go through and you look at what they did rushing touchdowns allowed. They finished tied 4th with Texas Tech and Indiana. Now, some of those teams played in the postseason, while others, like Notre Dame, only played their 12 regular season games. But I don't think that number would have changed that much. They only allowed one 100-yard rusher all season, and it was Braxton Woodson, the quarterback for Navy, triple option team. Again, context matters when you're talking about a team that averages 300-plus rushing yards a game, and you hold them well under 100 yards below what their average is week over week. That's a really impressive thing when you're talking about Notre Dame's run defense. So that's kind of the biggest thing that I wanted to see from Charlie Partridge, is maintaining that level of dominance. And that's an area where the interior of the defensive line can get a little bit better. I don't think we're going to see as much of, asking Donovan Heinisch to line nose up against Anez Cooper, who's a 6'6", 340-pound right guard. Because now you have guys like Tion Gray, who's 6'6" and wants to be around 315, 320. Kind of reminds me of that Jerron Jones 2016 build. You know what I mean? And so I think we could see a little bit of that. I also think that you now have, like I said earlier, the ability to match up well with larger interior offensive lines. You're going to face some of those this upcoming season. Miami has to replace 4 of their starting offensive linemen. I can almost guarantee you they're not going to replace them with a bunch of smaller G5 guys. Now, I don't think that that's on the docket for Miami's offensive line this upcoming season. So getting more consistency out of the interior of your defensive line in the run game, I think, is going to do tremendous things for this rush defense and kind of vault them from that top 10 to top 12 up into that top 5, like we've seen from other national championship winning defensive lines in the past. Another thing that I want to see and hope to see from Charlie Partridge's impact is a more effective interior pass rush. Look, folks, we've talked a lot on this show about what we believe Boubacar Traore is going to be this upcoming season, what we believe Bryce Young can be, what we believe Keon Keeley can be. We'll see what Logan Thomas is going to do. And obviously, we're all really high in the incoming freshmen in Ebenezer Utade and Rodney Dunham. But one thing that the Al Washington defensive line lacked last year, and I've been preaching that I think that Notre Dame's defensive line in 2025 was one of the most underrated units in the country. They never got the recognition I felt like that they deserved. But when you sit down and you look at what they bring back, the one thing that you could argue is they lack that dominant Riley Mills-esque type of pass rusher that we've seen. In 2024, he led the team in pressures and really only played in like 12 and a half, 13 games because he got injured around the third quarter against Indiana. I know it was in the second half. But you kind of lack that on paper so far. Jason Onye was starting to come on. He had 14 pressures in his final 6 games, I believe. Numbers we were talking about yesterday, 14 or 15. Finished the year with 17. First 6 games, he had 2 total pressures. He ended the regular season with 17 total. He was really starting to come on, and it was against important opponents. USC at home at night. You got Pitt on the road. He had a good game against Navy, not from a pass rushing standpoint, but you have some players that might be able to fill in and do some of those things for you. But when you go through and you look the rest of the roster top down, Tion Gray ended the year with 1 total pressure. Francis Brew has the ability to do that. Does he have somewhat of a Jared Dawson-esque type of impact on the interior pass rush? Potentially. Those are all questions that Charlie Partridge is going to have to answer. Those are things that he's going to have to get out of this group because like we've all established, the talent is undeniable in the room. Would it shock any of you in the chat if one of Francis Brew, Tion Gray, Jason Onye, Elijah Hughes, Tiki Hola, Armel Mukum, any one of those guys emerged as a premier pass rusher along the interior? I don't think it would surprise any of us. But that's when some of the uncertainty kicks in because we don't know who that's going to be. That's why I'm excited to watch what they're going to do from spring to summer into fall camp, because I think that's one thing that Charlie Partridge's impact we can see right away is his ability to generate a more consistent interior pass rush. You do that combined with the level of talent you return on the edge, we're going to start having some real fun conversations around Notre Dame's defensive line. But if he's able to do that while maintaining consistency in the run defense, this defensive line is going to pick up right where it left off and take it to another level in 2026. I have no doubt about that. None.
Where are you at with everything right now, Trev? Just curious.
Yeah, just talking about the Charlie Partridge impact, talked about, generating a more effective interior pass rush while still maintaining consistency in the run game.
Well, and I would even like to see it take another jump in the run game. I think that what we saw last year was certainly a jump, an improvement in what we saw from the Notre Dame run defense. There's no question. It was the first year since 2012 that Notre Dame held an opponent to less than 200 yards or less than 100 yards per game rushing. And the only team that actually went over, I think the only team that went over 200 yards against them was Navy. Mm-hmm. And that was barely. I mean, even some of the games where we thought they didn't play well in the run game, we saw them hold teams to, you look at, we didn't think they played well in the run game against Miami. They gave up $134. We didn't think they played great in the run game against A&M. They gave up 128 yards. Arkansas went for 158 yards. 50 plus of that was on one run by the quarterback on a blown assignment. Outside of that, they barely went over 100 yards in that game. In second half, they were much better. Rest of the way, last 8 games, they gave up 100, 51, 68, 12, 70, 112, and 86 rushing yards. The only exception to that is Navy, who they gave up 206 yards to. But if you look at it in context, that was, let's say, 79 yards below Navy's season total, and they held Navy to 4.6 yards per carry. Navy went for 5.8 on the season. So even in that situation, that was actually a really strong performance. And so we saw a level of run defense that honestly, look, for all the grief that Chris Ash gets from us, and honestly, in my opinion, it's rightfully so. What was the one big beef that we had with Al Golden?
Run defense.
He didn't put enough emphasis on the run defense, and I think it hurt them in some bigger moments and some bigger games. Not being able to shut down Northern Illinois when you needed to, not being able to stop Ohio State from being able to run the ball kind of down your throat a little bit, proved to be some costly moments for them. And, you think of the second half against Ohio State going all the way back to his first game, where Ohio State just kind of really leaned on Notre Dame in the fourth quarter, just kind of ran the clock out with their run game. Thanks also to some really money sideline throws from CJ Stroud. But that's one area where we hoped that Chris Ash would bring some improvement. And there's no question, Trev, that he did. The run defense was a lot better. My question is, do we know if it's good enough to be an elite run defense? That is more of a different question. And that's an area that I think there is room for improvement. Notre Dame did great. They held opponents to 99 yards per game last year. Indiana held teams to 77.2. Georgia held teams to 81.5. Miami held teams to 89.3. Ohio State held teams to 89.4. That there's an area for improvement. I'll say this: Miami's run defense did a whole lot better against Notre Dame's rushing offense than Notre Dame's run defense did against Miami's rushing offense. 100%. Even though we would say that the Notre Dame run defense did well that game, for the most part, they couldn't stop them on the last drive, and they were still able to kind of obviously perform better. So I think there's another level that they can get to, that they need to get to, in order to say, okay, now you have an elite run defense. And I think that is the area where I probably have, the biggest question marks. You look at Indiana in the postseason, Trevor, they held their 4 postseason opponents to 58, 23, 93, and 110 yards rushing. Like, is Notre Dame's defense that good? Notre Dame was doing that against BC and Stanford and Syracuse, which is great. But that's the thing that I want to see now in year 2 of Chris Ash, is I think he laid a great foundation in the run game. Now you need to take it to another level. That's something that Charlie Partridge is going to have to play a big role in and a big key in. And that success really comes down to, Trevor, a lot of it's going to be about the defensive tackles. Now, the good news is that Charlie Partridge has a pretty good idea of what it takes. So to remind people that in 2020, Pitt ranked third in rush defense that season, 93.6 yards allowed. In 2021, Pitt ranked sixth in rush defense, 89.2 yards allowed. And then 2022, they ranked eighth in rush defense. They gave up 98 yards per game. And in 2020, that Pitt defense held teams to 2.7 yards per play. The next year, it was the same thing, 2.7 yards per play. Notre Dame this year, very good at 99 yards per game, but then they also gave up 3.0 yards per play. They're their best number since 2012 in the regular season. But there's an even greater level that they can get to. And the good news is you're bringing in a defensive line coach who has a very clear recent track record, like during Marcus Freeman's tenure at Notre Dame, of being successful. Now, Pitt as a team fell off a cliff in 2023. Everything stunk in Pitt in 2023. But from like 19 to 22, that Pitt defensive line was outstanding. And it was the driver behind one of the best run defenses in college football for about a 3-4 year run.
Well, the benefit of looking what Charlie Partridge did at Pitt as well is you don't have to make analogies of, if he can make the jump of doing that with like a Fresno State D line to this level, there's not as much projection as needed. Notre Dame played Pitt during that period of time. Notre Dame got to see firsthand what a Charlie Partridge defensive line looked like. And if he can replicate a lot of that success with a higher ceiling of talent from top to bottom, I really like Notre Dame's odds of improvement. But I'm with you completely. Can Charlie Partridge get this run defense, especially the key interior defensive line, to be strong up the middle? Is that going to be the difference between Notre Dame being a top 10 to 12 rush defense to a top 5? You got to hope so.
Yeah.
Definitely got to hope so.
It's like even in 2023 when Pitt was not very good as a team, Notre Dame ran for 155 yards on them, but it was on 33 attempts. They only went for 4.7 yards per attempt. In 2020, when they played a Pitt run defense that was one of the best in the country, in the 3 games before the Pitt game, they ran for 281, 353, and 232. In the 5 games after Pitt, they ran for 227, 208, 274, 199, and 283. Against Pitt, they went for 115 yards on 50 carries, 2.3 per carry. And that was with Kyron Williams in a pretty darn good Notre Dame run game. So there's a track record there. Now it's going to be about, can Charlie Partridge get that out of a brand new group? Can he get that out of a group in year one? That, with a bunch of guys he's got to learn as players. So that's something I have to see. The good news is Charlie Partridge has spent a little bit of time around Notre Dame, the past year as a friend of Chris Ash. So he doesn't walk in completely blind to what the group is going to be as a defensive line. But the D tackle room looks very different than the one he saw last spring and summer. And so his ability to get that group to play to their best football and bring it together. That's the other thing is, even when you look at the returners, there's a lot of guys playing positions that they haven't really played before. With people they haven't played with before. Elijah Hughes has not taken that I can remember any meaningful snaps with Armel Mukam beside him. He hasn't taken many, if any, with Jason Onye beside him. He's taken none with Tion Gray and Francis Brew and Christopher Burgess and all those guys. So it's going to be about that. But here's the question that I have. Number one, look, it's clear that Notre Dame wants their D tackles to, number one, first and foremost, be run stuffers. And I support that. I love the fact that you had great pass rushers in Riley Mills and Howard Cross, and that's awesome. And I'd love to have that kind of guy, but not at the expense of run defense. And so the whole reason you bring in Francis Brew and Tion Gray is not because, dude, we're looking for the next Riley Mills. If your evaluation as a Notre Dame coaching staff was, we think that Francis Brew or Tion Gray can bring to the defense what Riley Mills did, you're not good at evaluating players. Or you got lucky if they turn out to be that. You got lucky because you didn't think he was going to do that.
Right.
You're bringing these guys in because their skill set is different than what you've had in the past. Their skill set is more of a physical, push, stout, dominant run defenders that you hope you can take to the next level as pass rushers. Now, Francis Brew has more of a proven pass rushing production background than what does Tion Gray. But it's not to the level of like what we've seen from guys in the past. So I think that's kind of where you look at it. Now, Jason Onye had a very strong track record as a pass rusher the second half of last year. So you don't want to abandon the pass rush either. That's my big thing, Trev, is yes, I want them to get even better against the run. That is priority numero uno for Charlie Partridge and Chris Ash when it comes to the D tackles. Shut down the middle of the offensive line. Bam. But I just don't want it to be at the expense of their ability to still get after the quarterback when they need to. That can look differently. It may not be like the sacks that Riley Mills had, but I wouldn't mind seeing Tion Gray come off the line and take a center or guard, just drive him right into the heels of the quarterback like Riley did in the Super Bowl. You know what I mean? So it's like that's kind of where I want to see this unit is run defenders first, pass rushers second. That fair? Where I think under Al Golden, it was kind of you wanted him to be a little bit balanced and maybe lean towards more pass rushing and things like that. With this group, I want them to be stout. I want it to take three guys to block Tion Gray and Francis Brew and Jason Onye or whatever your two-man combination is. I want there to be three guys blocking them every play. Whether you're doing it with shooting gaps or whether you're doing it with just being physical to point of attack and let those linebackers fly to the football. But when you need to, get off the block, get to the quarterback, or drive that guy. You come off, you drive that center right into the quarterback. If it's run, you're coming off and getting to the ball. If it's pass, you're just keeping him on his heels and planting him right in the front porch of the quarterback. And so I do want to see that this season. I don't want to see them completely abandon the desire to rush the passer. I'm not saying Chris Ash wants to do that. But we didn't really see the D tackles be used to get after the quarterback a whole lot last year until you saw a little bit from Onye down the stretch. Like Jared Dawson's pass rushing production took a jump. Now, he got a lot better as a run defender, but his pass rushing took a dip. I just want to see a little bit more of that this year from the unit while continuing to improve as run defenders. That's what I want to see from Charlie Partridge.
Yeah, and they're going to need it, and they're going to be tested right away in week one. I mean, I don't think Wisconsin's going to be challenging anybody for the Big Ten title, nor do I really think that their game is going to be overly close with Notre Dame. I mean, we talked about it yesterday, but FanDuel right now has Notre Dame as 16.5-point favorites, and honestly, I would be kind of surprised if that's what the final score margin was for Notre Dame. But with that being said, you bring in Colton Joseph, a mobile guy who can also make plays with his arm. And then they also rebuilt their running back room through the portal, bringing in Abu Sama from Iowa State. And then they also brought in Brian Jackson from USC. And so we're not going to have to wait long to find out if this is going to be the diverse interior defensive line that we're wanting to see. If they have the ability to shut down rushing lanes, they're going to be tested early. And that's something that I'm happy that we don't have to kind of wait and find out for this team. But we also, in the same light, we don't have to watch them try to do it against Miami, a top 10 opponent on the road in Hard Rock Stadium in week one either. So it's a happy middle ground, but I'm with you. You can't sacrifice the run game. We've spent ample time on this show talking about the importance of a strong rush defense and being strong up the middle. But I think to your point, I would like to see and hope maybe someday, maybe PFF for college football will do this and come out with a stat that's, sacks generated. I know the NFL does that. I think you would see a lot of those, especially with Tion Gray, with the type of sacks that he would be able to generate, opening holes for blitzing linebackers or other defensive tackles as well. I'm with you, man. I think that's really exciting.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, that's kind of you kick things off. The depth is there. The talent's there. It's about Charlie Partridge's ability to bring that unit together and quick learn. Because here's the challenge for a position coach, Trev, when you're new to a place. You don't really know what guys can do. Yeah, I might have been here for a few practices, but you have a sense of, okay, there's some talent here. But a few practices in the spring or summer or fall camp doesn't get you thinking like, okay, I know all the strength and weaknesses of Armo Mukum's game. I know all the strength and weaknesses of Jason Onye's game. The only guy on staff there's only two people on staff that have any knowledge of that. Number one is Nick Sebastian, who's been sort of your assistant D-line coach the last couple of years under Al Washington. You lean on him a little bit. And the other is Chris Ash, who knows them for a year and showed in the first month of the season he didn't really have a good sense of how to use his D-line either. So that's going to be a big challenge for him is quickly learn the strengths and weaknesses of your players and build around the strengths and enhance the weaknesses.
Yeah.
Is going to be his task. And that's how you get the most out of your defensive line. You build around their strengths and you enhance their weaknesses. And the good news is you're bringing in a D-line coach who has a proven track record of doing that. And now it's just about taking this unique group and getting to that point. So I think that's where a lot of my optimism comes from, is the fact that, look, Al Washington wanted to do something to better his career. And then another thing that bettered his career. So kind of two things, even though he left recently, he had left the D-line over a month ago. And so, Charlie Partridge got hired relatively quickly to replace Max Bulla on the staff, replacing Al Washington. So he's got a little bit more time under his belt than does, Coach Henry or Coach Jean-Marie. And that's where I think you have at least a little bit of a jump start on getting to know those players, getting in the film, watching practice film of the guys who didn't play in games, and watching game film and just getting a sense, see how guys work in the weight room, see who pushes themselves, see who's always kind of needing to be encouraged to get in there, get your rep, man. You're watching all this stuff right now, and that's where the evaluations are happening. And then say, okay, how can I coach these kids up? How can I take the guys that are already proven, get more out of them? And then how do I find some of these young hidden gems that maybe just need some encouragement, or maybe need a, foot up there, and say, okay, that's what I'm going to need to do in order to get the most out of this group.
Folks, don't go anywhere. That's going to do it for part one, but we are getting ready to dive into part two. We're going to start talking about some of the personnel groupings in Notre Dame's defensive tackle room. But before we get there, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that loves Notre Dame, college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Bryan, in part two of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we're going to keep talking about the interior of Notre Dame's defensive line. We spent part one talking about kind of the expectations of the group as a whole and the role that Charlie Partridge is going to play in that. Now we're going to kind of talk about some of the assets that are at his disposal. And we've broken these down into different types of categories, I guess would be the best way to phrase that. And it's a little bit different than some of the other position previews that we've done, but we've sorted these into different buckets. But it starts with the biggest question, Bryan, is does Notre Dame have the talent in this room to be an elite defensive tackle room? And I think that they do. Yeah,
they at least have the talent, in my opinion, Trevor, to be a really good group. They at least have that. And will they play to that level? Obviously remains to be seen, but you have a proven player in Francis Brew, a proven all-ACC player. So, yes, you do have an understanding of what he's bringing to the table. Somebody earlier in the chat said, we don't really know what he's going to bring. Yeah, we have a pretty good idea. You can ask Gerby Lambert and Joe Otting and Sullivan Absher what Francis Brew brings to the table, and they're going to tell you that guy was a headache for us. Now, there's a system change, and there's some things he's going to have to adapt to, but you have an idea of what he brings to the table. You have a floor of what he brings. You have a floor of what Tion Gray brings to the table. Then you look at a guy like Jason Onye, and you have to ask some questions like, okay, well, what version of Jason Onye are we going to get for most of the season or in the bigger games? Are we going to get the version that's just kind of there eating up space? Or are we going to get the version that's an impact player that is hard to block? I mean, I still remember 2 springs ago when I'm watching Notre Dame offensive line, I'm thinking, dude, they can't block this guy. The whole spring, they can't block this guy. Well, he was starting to then show that in 2025. I mean, he was starting to or 2024, his game was starting to really take off. The Purdue game especially, Jason was really good for Notre Dame in 2024. And we're like, dude, his game is like, it's ready to explode, dude. Like this guy's starting to show something. I mean, if you look at Jason Onye's last 3 games, he had against Purdue, Miami of Ohio, and Louisville, he had 10 pressures, 2 sacks, and 2 hits on the quarterback in 3 games. Trev, I mean, just to give you a sense of how dominant that is, if he were to do that over the course of an entire season, that's 40 pressures, 16 hits plus sacks on the quarterback, and 16 run stuffs. That's big-time impact. And then his season is cut short. And I think it took him a while to kind of get back to being that player. But then when the light went on, USC game, he was that guy again. for 6 games now instead of just 3. So now the question is, okay, is he capable of doing that for an entire season or not? That's going to factor into it. And we'll talk more about Jason in a bit. Does Armel Mukum finally break out? Does Cole Mullins play D-end or D-tackle? I literally had him on the depth chart at both places because you have to think about where's he going to fit. Does Chris Burgess step up? Does Brendan Vernon live up to his expectations? Does he use the new position coach as a chance to kind of rejuvenate his career a little bit? And is Davion Dixon ready to force his way into the rotation? Can the freshman help? There's a lot of questions. And to act like, oh, this is a solid group, we know exactly what they're going to be, we know everything that they're going to be, I think would be a little bit disingenuous on my part to act like this is just like, yeah, we know exactly what this group is going to be. We don't. The question here that Trevor asked is, okay, is there the potential for this unit to be elite? And that's where I think it is. But as we say every time we do one of these, Trevor, look, in February, you're going to be talking a lot about potential of a team.
Sure.
That's just the nature of being in February. What we hope for is that by September, October, November, we're not using that word potential anymore. We're using that we're talking about the production. And hopefully that's in a positive way, not a lack of production, but wow, look how good this group can be. The reason that I'm optimistic about this group, Trev, is that there are so many good options, and you only need really 4 of them to step up and perform at a high level. Anything beyond that's gravy. And I think that you're looking at a rotation where you could have, 6, 7 guys on a weekly basis stepping up and really helping you and have playmaker ability. And it's just about how many of those guys really step up and perform. I mean, there's years not that long ago where if I'd have put a defensive tackle rotation, you'd have had Davion Dixon as the number 5 D tackle overall, not number 5 nose tackle. Now, that's just where he is now. I mean, he could clearly raise up. But my point is he would have gone into the season in the top 4 to 5 overall at D tackle, much less at one of the 2 position groups. Same with Chris Burgess. Same with Cole Mullins, where those guys are 1s and 2s in a lot of other years. Now they're fighting to just get on the field. And I've said this a lot this offseason. What I like about this team is the depth of talent. The reason that there's a depth of talent, or why depth of talent is important, because the greater your depth of talent, the greater your margin for error. It's like we talked about receiver. It's not just like, well, if this one guy steps up, if Francis Bruce steps up, they're going to be okay. Well, if he doesn't step up, but Chris Burgess has a breakout, they're fine. If he doesn't step up, but Armel Mukum has a breakout, they're fine. If he doesn't step up, but Cole Mullins or Elijah Hughes or Brendan Vernon, or you know what I mean? Like, then that's the difference. And that's what gives me optimism that even though there are some question marks about just what this group will look like, that depth of talent is where my excitement comes from with the D-line.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, man. I mean, that's a sentiment that we've been talking about here, is just the margin for error. And you can see the evolution of the defensive tackle room as a whole is very similar to what the evolution of the wide receiver room was as a whole. I mean, even in 2024, a year where Riley Mills broke out, it was still one of those years where it was like, okay, if Notre Dame's defensive tackle position group is going to play like how they need to win a championship, you need Riley Mills and Howard Cross. We'll see what you get from Onye. We'll see what you get from Rubio. Now they're at a point where it's like, okay, you get Brew, Hughes, Burgess, potentially Mullins, Onye, Tion Gray, Armel Mukum. Is there going to be any sort of sophomore surge, a push from the juniors? We'll see. But that's a much better spot to be in than, I think back to the wide receiver core. It's like, okay, well, hey, we're talking about the 2022 receiving core. If Deion Colsey and Lorenzo Styles don't break out and be who you think they are, I don't know what Notre Dame's pass game is going to look like. And the benefit and what gets me so excited about this upcoming season is that was the exact same conversation that we were having about this defensive tackle room a month and a half ago. And the outlook has just changed so quickly. And it's because of this depth of talent that you have, unproven by the masses. But once we get into the next part of this show, not getting the cart too far in front ahead of the horse here, but once we get into the next part of the show, there's kind of a lot of that going on around in college football to a degree. And I'm willing to bet on the depth of talent that Notre Dame has across this position group. And also, when you look at it, there's only 2 guys that can't come back. So it's a depth of talent that can stay. That's huge.
Yeah. It is, and you got to keep them together. And so now it's about, okay, can they perform this year? Because the future, I think, is very bright at the position, but they need to be good now. Like, that's the big thing. They need to be good now. And that's the big question mark, Trev. So, and I think it starts with, first and foremost, it's going to start with, I think we got to start at the top and look at the veteran players. I think that's going to be the big thing, is when you look at this, and Elijah Hughes, it's like, do it. If you just do what you did last year, we're good. I'd like to see another level from Elijah. I think he's capable of another level, Trev, year 2 in the system. More technique at, coaching, receiving more technique coaching now in year 2. Being a year stronger, a year older, he's going into a senior season. I think he's capable of being better, but I just need him to do what he did last year. And that's always a good place to be if you're just like, dude, I just need you to repeat what you did last year at the bare minimum. Anything beyond that's great. But Jason Onye is, to me, arguably the biggest key to this defensive tackle rotation of how good it's going to be. I don't think it can be elite if he doesn't step up. Well, I'm going to tell you, it can be, but it's going to be harder. It's going to be harder. He's got to be the player consistently the player that he's shown himself to be in flashes. And when I mean flashes, I don't mean a game here or a game there or a series here or a series. I mean stretches of the season where, like, week after week, he's a dog. Like you look at the last 3 games of 2024, we're having a conversation. Remember, let's remind people of that. Trev, you probably remember this because this was still kind of your whirlwind welcome to IB period. And you were pretty good mood back then, Trev. I mean, I know Nate lost Northern Illinois, but you're like, I'm a married man. This is good stuff. Like, you're hanging on to every word that I'm saying. I say sarcastically, but we were talking then like, dude, I think going into the bye, we felt that Jason Onye was playing like their best D tackle. We said that in a show, that for the last 3 games, he's been their best D tackle. And then boom, just like that, he's gone. And then you look at last year, and he didn't do a whole lot the first 6 games. He started the first game, and he didn't look like that guy we saw at the end of the year, which wasn't super surprising when you consider he missed so much of the season in the offseason. But then, boom, just like that, NC State game goes by. Another game we don't see a whole lot. Notre Dame 6 games into the year. He's got 2 pressures. That's it. The entire year. He's only got 4 run stops the entire year. No sacks. Not really playing at a super high level, just kind of there. And then the USC game happens, and he gets a season high in snaps, grades out extremely high, 2 pressures, 2 run stops, force at the point of attack. And then BC, 5 pressures. Navy, 2 pressures. Pitt, 3 pressures and a sack. A pressure against Syracuse, and then Stanford, 2 pressures and 2 run stops. He had 1 pressure against Syracuse, but he had 3 run stops, a career high 3 run stops in that game. And then Stanford, 2 run stops, including a hit, or 2 pressures, including hitting the quarterback, 2 stops. And as I mentioned yesterday, when we were talking about Onye, you look at his numbers at the end of the year, Trev, and you're talking about a guy that had 15 pressures in 6 games and still wasn't as dominant as he could have been. He was still kind of working out the kinks, but man, he was much better. If you can get that version of Jason Onye for an entire season, that is a really good football player. Really good football player. And you put him next to the rest of the guys that we're going to talk about, and that's the recipe to this team being an elite D-line. If the ranking that you and I are going to have for the defensive line when we do it, Jason Onye breaking out is a big part of that. We both project that. But that's going to be an incredibly important thing for Charlie Partridge. What's the key to unlocking that version of Jason Onye for an entire season? Now, entire season doesn't mean he has to have 12 games in the regular season of elite football. Everybody has some level of ups and downs, but it's more about the consistency of production and performance that he's capable of. But we just haven't seen for enough long. Well, we've never seen it for an entire season.
Yeah.
And now he's got to prove that he can do that.
Yeah, 100%. Look, when I look at the vets in the room and how I look at any veteran presence in any position room, they anchor the unit. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're your best player. That doesn't mean that they're your most productive player. That means that they are the leaders in the room. Jason Onye is going into his 6th year with the Notre Dame football program. They anchor the unit. Who do you look to make a play? Who do you rely on when it's the middle of the summer and nobody wants to go to a workout? They need to turn to 47. I mean, I don't know if he's going to be wearing his jersey at that point in time, but you get what I'm saying. You look to 47 to rally the troops. They set the foundation for this room. They are the floor setters of this room. This group will be as good as what Onye and Elijah Hughes kind of set precedent moving forward. And that's why I think that it's so important. But then, Bryan, when you get into the next group that we're talking about here, the transfers, now we're getting into the ceiling discussion because you're going to need all of it. You're going to need this rotation. Notre Dame is still the favorite on FanDuel to win the national championship. The interior of the defensive line is going to play a huge role in that, and the transfers are going to take that a long way.
Look, this is why you brought them in, and this is where a lot of our optimism comes from. I mean, if you think about it, and one thing I didn't mention in the beginning, when the transfer portal opened, this group did not have Francis Brew on it. It did not have Christopher Burgess on it. It did not have Jason Onye on it, and it did not have Tion Gray on it, and it did not have Armo Mukum on it. Think about that, Trev. Talk about how quickly things change. Jason Onye gets his 6th year. Armel comes back. Chris Burgess transitions inside. But what really sets it over the top, like those things were exciting. Like I'm thinking this D-tackle room is going to be pretty solid if Onye has a breakout, if Burgess moves, Hughes and Mukum and Sevalon. I mean, there's a lot there to have a pretty good D-tackle room. What makes me think this room has a chance to be elite is that you take all those players and the incoming freshmen, and then you add Francis Brew and Tion Gray to it. And I think that's really what takes it over the top for me. With Francis Brew, you're talking about a guy with a proven track record. You're talking about a guy that has been, played two seasons at Pitt. He was a freshman All-American, according to Pro Football Focus, in 2024. As a true freshman, this past season for Pitt, he has 36 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, and a sack. That would have led the Notre Dame defensive tackle room in tackles for loss with 7. That's obviously very good success. I think Riley Mills had 8.5 tackles for loss during his All-American season, I believe. I'm actually going to go look that up real quick. Riley had, 8.5 tackles for loss in 13 games. Now, Riley was obviously a lot more proficient from a pass rushing standpoint, but they're kind of polar opposites. One of Riley's tackles for loss was in the run game. All but one of Francis Brew's tackles for loss were in the run game. You know what I mean? Because he only had 1 sack. So they're very different players. They're built different. They play different. This is a young man that is extremely strong, extremely physical. He was someone who was in Bruce Feldman's freaks list last year going into 2025. He was number, I believe, 24 on that. Bruce Feldman had him ranked very high on that list. I'm actually going to pull that up now and read again, what Feldman said about him. But he had him number 24 on his freaks list last year. And a lot of it had to do with his strength. He says the Ohio native made the freaks list last year as a true freshman. So I guess he's made it 2 years in a row. On the season, Francis Brew had 15 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, and 1.5 sacks. The 6'1", 280-pound 19-year-old squatted 685 pounds, bench pressed 475 pounds, and jumped 33 inches. So that's pretty impressive. That's very impressive. So to have a guy like that kind of coming over and playing in this defense where, I think this defense suits his skill set well, Trev. But the other thing that you think about with Francis Brew is he's going to be someone who is going to be surrounded by better talent. Here's a comment from he was number 77 on Feldman's freaks list and as a true freshman. And he said the freshman from Ohio who enrolled in January quickly turned heads in the program. The 6'1", 280-pounder squatted 675 and bench pressed 475. Pitt linebacker Brandon George, a former state runner-up in the discus and bronze medalist in the shot put, is another freaks. Talking about something different. So this is a kid that has been college football for 2 years. He's made Bruce Feldman's freak list twice, and he's going to be surrounded by Jason Onye, Tion Gray, Elijah Hughes, Chris Burgess. Like, that's something you got to get excited about. He won't have to be like the guy. Now, Pitt had a good defensive line, but not like this. And now he's a year older. He's a year stronger. He's a year more mature. And you start getting excited about what he brings to the table. And Tion Gray just gives you that. The nose tackle depth chart as a whole is so much bigger. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, Trev, where they didn't have 5 defensive tackles with over 300 pounds. Now they have 5 nose tackles over 300 pounds. And obviously Tion Gray's the biggest guy. Now, he did say yesterday he wants to get down to 315 and 320. And Charlie Partridge was asked about that, Trev, and I don't know what your thoughts were on it, but I actually kind of liked Coach Partridge's response. And I'm gonna pull that up here real quick. But it seemed to me, maybe I'm reading it differently, but it seemed to me that they were open to it. Like, it wasn't something that they were they weren't against it, and I thought that was good, because if I'm reading this correctly, I mean, obviously Tion wants to kind of get down to a little bit more
like
weight.
315, 320.
Yeah, this is his direct comment. He says, right now I'm 335. I plan to drop down to 315, 320, just be more mobile and just feel better when I'm playing. That's something I wanted. They didn't encourage it. I told them what I wanted to do, and we set up a meal plan and everything. Now it's just getting work and drop the weight. So Notre Dame is receptive to this. And to me, I like the idea of getting more mobile. And that's one of the things with Tion Gray, when you look at kind of what he can be, I think that makes him be more disruptive. 315, 320 is still pretty big. And this is what Charlie Partridge said on that. He said, here's my belief on that. Again, you've got weight target goals. For me, it's a little bit about lean body mass, right? And there's a million studies out there that the more you can have lean body mass as opposed to not, your risk of injury goes dramatically down. So obviously movement skills, as long as he loses the right 10 pounds to go from 25 to 15, I'm good. There are some guys who can carry 323. Grover Stewart, he was 320 with freaky lean body mass. It's more about that than the other. And so I think I think that was a great way of putting it, because it's not about the weight. If he's losing weight because he's not getting stronger and he's losing, you could lose 10, 15 pounds of muscle mass. You didn't get rid of your fat. You just got rid of muscle mass. That's not good. What he's referring to is getting rid of some of the not good weight and making sure that you're maintaining that strength and explosiveness. But I think Tion Gray, about 10 to 15 pounds lighter, as long as the strength continues to grow, could be a far more disruptive player, because that's the only, at Oregon, he was a space eater. At Notre Dame, you want him to be a space eater that can make plays. And that's going to be the key for him. So this is an impactful pickup from these two guys.
Yeah, absolutely. I talked about this last night on IB Nation Sports Beat, but I said that it kind of reminds me that they just added like a 2016 Jerron Jones to the list. You remember how impactful he was. Very similar body types, very long. And if he gets down to that 315 to 320 range, it's exactly where Jerron Jones was in 2016. He was 6'5", 316, I think. And so obviously we remember how disruptive he was, 11 tackles for a loss that year. And so I love the skill set, but the rationale behind it, I buy into. It's how you carry it. It's not just looking at the number, to your point. Couldn't agree more. I think those impacts are going to be huge. But with any unit, Bryan, like we know, you're going to need people to step up. And in an ideal world, it's both of these next two guys that we're going to talk about, these up-and-comers. But you need at least one of them. And we're talking about Christopher Burgess, and we're talking about Armel Newcomb here.
Yeah. I look, if they both have productive off seasons to where they force their way on the field, this will, in my opinion, be the best D-tackle rotation in college football.
Yeah.
Like, I have no doubt that it'll be that good. It can be that good. But the only way it truly gets to that level is if one of these guys breaks out. Let's just say Jason Onye is just a good player Francis Brew does what he does, Tion Gray does what he does, Elisha Hughes does what he does. That's a pretty good D tackle rotation, Trev. That's real. It's a top 10 to 12 D tackle rotation. But if all of a sudden you throw a breakout from Armo Mukum, a breakout from Chris Burgess, or both, now all of a sudden you're putting a different type of player. Because here's the reality of it, especially with Burgess, but even to a degree with Mukum, there's a level of athleticism with those two that isn't necessarily there with a bunch of those other guys. Maybe Onye. And that's kind of the thing is with Christopher Burgess, I don't need him to be a breakout that like he becomes 2024 Riley Mills as a redshirt freshman. You just look, if he's playing 10 to 12 snaps a game, you want him to be a giant pain in the butt of the defense in those 10 to 12 snaps. Or the offense, I mean. Same thing with Armo Mukum. And if they're getting more than that because they're that good, then, man, they're ready to play. And if you can go with a deeper rotation throughout the season and keep those, Brew and Onye and Gray healthy and fresh, then you're going to have a chance to be really good. Because let me explain why. I want to make sure that I'm clear about why I am so big on less reps in games. Because number one, less reps in games also means less reps in practice. Now, that doesn't mean you're not getting enough reps in practice, but you're not dominating the reps in practice the same way. Because in order to get a Christopher Burgess or an Armo Mukum ready to go, you've got to give them the rep opportunities in practice. In a 15 to 16 game playoff, you're going to want guys to be fresher as they get later in the season. The other thing, too, is anyone that's ever worked out in the weight room knows your biggest injuries come from what, Trev? Either A, not a proper warm-up where you just jump right into benching 315, or B, when you get past that point of fatigue, your body is then more vulnerable to different types of injuries. And so to me, when I look at big boys like this, it's different for offensive linemen because the movement is different for an offensive lineman. That's why you don't just reverse them and just say, this guy's a guard, let's put him at D tackle. It's a very different type of athletic skill set, different type of movements, just different type of responsibilities. And when you lose some of that twitch, some of that burst, some of those type of things because you're worn out, you're banged up, now all of a sudden your twist, your TE twist is a lot slower than it was in week 4. And that's the difference between what? That's the difference between you hitting Will Howard before that last ball gets thrown to Jeremiah Smith or you hitting him after he releases the ball on the throw to Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah.
Like it can mean that type of thing. And that's just an example. That play was not a TE twist. That was Drake Bowen come on. But I'm just making a point. That's the difference between I'm a little bit more fresh in the fourth quarter than I was. And that's why that's important to me. And it's about keeping that group healthy. So the more guys that force their way onto the field, the better. Now, you can play Christopher Burgess against Purdue, and you can play him against certain teams if he's not completely ready to help you. But if you want to beat Miami and you want to beat SMU and you want to beat BYU and you want to beat Navy and you want to beat Georgia, you want to beat Oregon, you want to beat Texas, you want to beat Ohio State, you want to beat Indiana, teams like that in the postseason, you're only going to play that guy if he's ready to really help you and make plays for you. And that's what we're talking about here. If one of those two guys breaks out, this makes this D tackle rotation really good. If both of them kind of force their way into the rotation, that's what separates Notre Dame from being a really good D tackle group and the nation's premier defensive tackle group. Because they have that kind of high-level NFL size plus athleticism plus playmaking potential that maybe has been lacking from some of the better D tackles in recent years outside of Riley Mills.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything that you said about Christopher Burgess and Armel Mukum. Now, here's the bright side here, Brian. They are also going to be pushed. There are players behind them that are battling for a spot in the rotation. So when we're talking about guys like Brennan Vernon or Davian Dixon or Sean Sevillano or Gordy Solstead, they're not just going to sit back and accept, well, you got Armel Mukum, he came back, he's in front of me, and, Christopher Burgess just made the move inside. No, those are all 4 guys that are going to be fighting for a spot in that rotation. And that's, again, it goes back to what we talked about in the first segment about Charlie Partridge preaching about how this is going to be an ongoing evaluation as the season goes on. To me, I read into that and I think that's not just, okay, whoever trots out there in the rotation in September, that's going to be the exact same rotation that they go with in December and January. It's not what that tells me. It's going to be an ongoing evaluation, and that's something that's really promising. But those two guys, those up-and-comers, they're going to be pushed heavily by some of those guys behind them fighting for a rotation spot. That's for sure.
It's an exciting group, Trev. It really is. And then look, there's other guys that I'm looking forward to seeing this offseason as well. And Brendan Vernon's a very intriguing player because Brennan was a kid that I thought flashed early in his career. I mean, I remember it was the BC game in 2023. No, it was 2022. This was his freshman year, I believe. And no, he was a freshman in what game was it? It was the snow game. Was that 23? That was 22, wasn't it?
Snow game was 22. Yep.
Let me go look because I'm like going to start talking out of my what.
No, snow game was 22 because BMO had 3 picks in that one.
No, I'm saying I thought he played that game. I thought Brendan played that game, but I might be missing something. What was the game in 23? It was the Wake Forest game. I knew it was a home game late in the year, but I watched him play and I'm thinking like, man, he's flashing. He's coming off the field. He's flashing. And I remember one of the springs where Brendan had some really good pressures up the middle, and you're thinking like, okay, he's got a chance, and then just nothing ever came. And I think he was a guy that the past defensive line coach, just for whatever reason, just didn't think he could play for him. Maybe there's a valid reason for that. Maybe not. But now we're going to find out because, again, Charlie Partridge is not going to He's not going to just say, well, the previous coach didn't think you could play, so I'm not going to give you a chance. Brendan Vernon is going to get an opportunity to go out there and say, hey, man, I can help out or I can't. And I'm not saying he will. Don't know. I'm simply saying we're going to see if he's got a chance. This is his chance. Like, look, man, the coach who didn't think you could play, he's gone. And every coach makes these mistakes. We brought up the other day. I don't think Al Washington was super high on Aiden Kaneana. Then he goes to Cal, and he's a pretty darn good football player at Cal. So can Brendan Vernon be that kind of player? I don't know. But he's a big kid. He's got some vertical explosiveness we've seen. He's got to be better with his technique, and he's got to be more assignment correct. That was a big thing that I heard from people at Notre Dame that got him in trouble is, he'd make this great rep, but then it's like, but he hit it with the wrong gap, where if you're playing a better team, maybe the quarterback steps into that open gap. Or he would look great for those 2 reps, and then the next 3 he's getting knocked off the ball because he doesn't come off with proper technique, things like that. So, but this is his chance to kind of say, hey, I've got I want to go play. Same thing with Sean Sevillano. This is your chance to kind of say, hey, dude, you're going into year 3 now. You're a big kid. You've done some things at Notre Dame. You've worked a little bit. You had some chances to do some things against Navy last year in the first half. Now's your chance to, hey, coach, man, don't forget about me. I'm here too. Davion Dixon's another one, Trev. Gordy Solstead is probably a year away. But I'll just tell you right now, there's a lot of people in the Notre Dame program last year, and I don't know how the new staff is going to feel about it. There's a lot of people that said Gordy's not ready yet. But the guy we hoped he would be, he is. The Gordy was a kid that was about 230 when Notre Dame got him to commit. But when they met him, he played D-end in high school. And then I remember watching this film, Trev, saying when he moved to inside, he looked so much more comfortable. Gordy's dad, Alex, played in the NFL. He was an offensive lineman. He's over 300 pounds. And when they met Gordy, they saw this kid with this great frame. They're like, that kid's going to blow up. They felt about him a lot like they did about Bryce Young, that this kid is going to get massive. But even more so, he's now up to 270. He was listed at 260 last year. He was closer to 250 when he showed up at Notre Dame. Trust me.
Sure.
He was coming off the torn ACL. He's up over 270 now. But they love his potential. It's probably a year away from the physical development. But he's a guy to keep an eye on. And then the other one's Davion Dixon, who missed some of last year with an injury. There's some people that like what he brings to the table. He's big, he's strong, he's athletic. For Davion, it's just about consistency every day. You've got to bring it every day. There's days where Davion's like, dude, that can play for us. And then there's other days you're like, does he even want to be here? That's going to be the big thing. And that's a knock on a lot of 300-pounders when they're young. It's just understand the level of You could just bully people in high school because you're so big and strong and athletic. You can't do that when you're going against, Notre Dame offensive linemen. You know what I
Kirby
mean?
Lambert. Yeah.
Right. Mr. Tarek is not a small human being,
Right.
And so for him, it's just about a level of consistent work and focus and then staying healthy. But he's another guy to keep an eye on, Trevor. So even in that younger group, or that second group of guys, I shouldn't say younger because Sean and Brennan aren't really young anymore. But even that in that lower tier of guys, there's some potential there. That do they get their shot? Do they force somebody out of the rotation? Do they, does Brendan Vernon have a breakout which makes them be more comfortable moving Cole Mullins out to defensive end or something like that? I don't know the answer to that, but this is a big offseason for all for three of those four guys. Gordy this isn't a big offseason for Gordy. If Gordy forces away in the field, great. If he doesn't, they weren't necessarily planning on him being a guy in the first couple years. They're more of, we can't wait to see his redshirt sophomore, redshirt junior, and fifth year. That was when you hope that Gordy kind of has that breakout. But with Brennan and Sean and Davion, they are actually entering a very important year for them because, the transfers that they brought in are in the same grade as Sean Sevillano. And they're younger than Brendan Vernon, and they're only a year older than Davion Dixon. And, Trev, you've got these two stud freshmen showing up. There's a lot of kids in the sophomore and junior class that you're kind of like, dude, if you don't show yourself now. I did a tight end preview today on irishbreakdown.com. It's also on the premium message board. And look, I think Jack Larson's a good football player, but he enters the now or never moment of his career because you're chasing the veterans, Cooper Flanagan and Ty Washington, but you've got James Flanagan, Ian Premer, and Preston Frizzell now breathing down your neck. Where if that jump doesn't happen for you now, you're going to get passed up by younger guys. And when you get passed up by younger guys, it's rare that you kind of bounce back and take that job because it's not like they've peaked as freshmen and sophomores. You know what I mean? Same thing here. If you're Davion Dixon, Sean Sevillano, Armel Mukam, you better hope that you ball out this year because you're going to have to deal with not only the Jason Tion Gray, but you got to deal with Tiki Hola now. If you're Brendan Vernon, Chris Burgess, Elijah Hughes, if you don't have, well, Hughes is the senior, but Cole Mullins, guys like that, if you don't have that jump now, you got Elijah Golden breathing down your neck. And so those are things that you look at and say, you got to get yourself prepared to perform this year. It's a big year. And I think the competition in this depth chart right here that you're looking at, if you're on the video, if you're not, you'll find it on the message board. I've got things broken down on for premium members. But man, Trev, the competition that's going to happen at defensive tackle this offseason is just going to be outstanding. And guys are going to have to, hey man, step up or get out the way. I mean, that's what it is. And so I'm looking forward to seeing those guys because I'm telling you right now, you don't want to miss time. If you're a veteran, you do not want to miss time. You do not want to be out a couple weeks with an injury when you've got Christopher Burgess and Gordy Solstead and Tiki Hola and Elijah Golden just waiting for that opportunity.
Yeah.
If you're Jason Onier or Tion Gray, you do not want to miss 2 weeks where you're going to give Armel Mukam all those reps. If you're Elijah Hughes, you don't want to miss time during the fall or spring practice where Chris Burgess is getting all those reps with you out. If you get injured, you get injured. But I'm just saying, those guys can Wally Pitt people real easily if you give them that chance. And that's what excites me about just not the present of the room, but also why I think the defensive line, the defensive tackle room is in a pretty good place for years to come, not just in 27 when Brew and Gray and those guys can come back, but even beyond. And look at the depth chart right here, Trev. There's 13 guys on the defensive tackle depth chart between the two. There's only 2 players that are out of eligibility after the season. There's only 3 that are juniors. So you have 3 sophomore eligibility players and you have 5 freshman eligibility players. There's more guys on this depth chart with freshman and sophomore eligibility than there are with junior and senior eligibility. And that gets me a little bit fired up about the D tackle room.
Yeah, the biggest thing that gets me fired up about them is the 2 incoming freshmen. In years past, recent years, while Marcus Freeman was in South Bend, Elijah Golden and Tiki Hola are playing. Nor would it surprise me if they end up playing this year. Tiki Hola is 6'3", 280 for now. Elijah Golden is 6'4", 275 for now. I look at Elijah Golden very similar to how I looked at Madden Faremo at this time last year. This time last year, I was looking at the linebacker rotation. I was like, yo, Madden Faremo has all the talent in the world. This is a very deep rotation. If he cracks it, that means that light bulb went on, and it was undeniable to keep him off. That's how I feel a little bit about Elijah Golden. Very raw, all the physical tools. But if it comes on, man, I'm with you. The talent in this room is exceptional, and it kind of leads us into what we're getting ready to talk about, ranking the top 10 D-line units in college football. But, folks, before we get there, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Be sure to share this podcast, whatever streaming platform you listen to us on. We would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But now that it is the thick of the off season and you want to stay in tune, the best way to stay in tune and the best way to support us is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in part 3 today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we're going to be talking about the top 10 defensive line units in the country in 2026. Now, obviously, some projection is being used here, but what we did is we sat down, we broke it down, looked what teams did in the portal, look who they have coming back, and we're projecting a little bit forward here with what we believe the top defensive line units are going to be in the country. And pretty par for the course with a lot of mine and Brian's lists, a lot of similarities. It's funny, we were cracking jokes with each other when we called and we were prepping for the show, and he's like, who's your 1 and 2? And I gave him mine and he gave me his, and a little chuckle afterwards because shocker, there wasn't a whole lot of variance. But I'm excited to dive into these, Brian. I love doing these top 10 lists this early in the offseason.
Yeah, it's fun because it forces you to start looking into other teams and what they have coming back. And if you really want to appreciate where Notre Dame is and how good Notre Dame is or isn't, it's good to stack them up against other teams. And so we always like to do kind of stuff like that. And it's an interesting year because a lot of the better defensive lines in the country are going to be very portal driven, which made even more projection than normal for doing this ranking. And obviously, I personally gave a lot of credence to teams that have guys returning. Everybody that, I can't think of a D-line I have in my top 10 that doesn't have a portal impact. I don't know of anybody that's necessarily relying on, just homegrown players. I'm actually looking at my list now, Trev, and there's one starting lineup that won't be touched by the portal. And that's my number one group, which I won't say it just yet. Everybody else that I'm looking at has at least one portal guy that's either going to be a starter or a backup out. There's one except for my number 9 team. That's it. Everybody else has some level of portal impact in their starting lineup. And every team, including the team at the top whose starting lineup wasn't touched by the portal, their entire depth is almost entirely from the portal, outside of a couple young defensive ends. So it required a lot of projection this year. And so it made it a little bit challenging. And then, of course, what your system is and, who's coaching the unit, all those things factor into me. But what we're going to do is kind of what we always do. We're going to kind of go back and forth. Trev's going to go 10 to 6, give you his 10 to 6 teams, and I'll give you my 10 to 6, and then he'll give you 5 to 1, and I'll give you my 5 to 1. And we're going to have some fun with it. I think our top 2, I'm looking at the list now. We had the same top 2. We had the same 3 and 4, but reversed. We had the same 5. And then there's a little bit of different, like there's no others after that were on the same. And then I have 8 teams that you have 8 teams that I have. And the 2 teams we don't have in common are teams at the bottom. Like you don't have my number 8 and my number 9, and I don't have your number 9 and your number 10. So let's have some fun with it, Trev, and we'll kick things off with your list with your number 10.
Number 10 team is the Michigan Wolverines, and this is a program that has kind of built an identity through being solid in the trenches, and I think that their quick hire of Kyle Whittingham kind of helped that. Now, obviously, they've lost a lot the last 2 years, very similar to what Notre Dame has gone through over the last couple of seasons, but I like what they bring back, especially in the interior. I like what Trey Pierce and Eno Etta, who actually withdrew his name from the transfer portal, bring to the table. The only thing that prevented me from putting them any higher, and this is kind of floor versus ceiling debate here, and one of the reasons why I'm sure Brian left depending on what he does with his list. Don't want to spoil anything with Michigan. Brian doesn't have Michigan on.
I'm
on
good
his
saying
list.
that. Yeah, I'm good saying that. I don't have Michigan on.
Yep. Brian doesn't have Michigan on this list. And one of the reasons why I have them at 10th is kind of the status of John Henry Daly, the defensive end transfer pickup that they got from Utah. If he works out for them, I really like where this defensive line room is at from a starting standpoint. Michigan's always going to have some level of quality depth in their trenches, but it's kind of what puts them at number 10 for me. Number 9, I'm going with the Oklahoma Sooners. Their defensive line, and this has a lot of room for variance with me. It wouldn't surprise me that if a Brett Venables-led team and their defensive line ended up being higher than 9th when the season was over. But I look at what they bring back. I like Taylor Wine, and I like David Stone. I think this team is going to be relatively set on the edges, but there's going to be a lot of projection here with the interior. They have Adebawore coming back on the interior. He started to break out towards the latter half of the regular season, and then Jaden Jackson is expected to take on a much bigger role this season for the Sooners as well. I can't put them any higher than this because, again, this list is based on a lot on projection. But with Oklahoma, there's a little bit too much projection that I would have to put into them to put them any higher than 9th. So I have them at 9 for now. My number 8 team is the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Again, this is going to be a very portal-driven team. Not to the surprise of many people while they're still trying to generate their high school pipeline. But I do like what they brought in the portal. I believe A.J. Holmes comes back for them. That is a huge pickup for them. Very experienced player, played for them in the postseason. And then they got the Mateen kid from Wake Forest. I wish I could say his last name, but I'm just going to butcher it. So we're sticking with Mateen. But I like what Texas Tech has. Now, the biggest question for them is going to be their edge players. Do they have a David Bailey on their current roster, or did they get one in the portal? I don't think so. And then they also lost the Romello Heights kid. I think the edge is what is preventing me from putting Texas Tech much higher on this list. But I love the interior. And then overall defensively, they're going to be helped out massively by what their linebacking core brings back. Very stout up the middle, but for defensive line purposes, I can only keep them at 8 because their edge remains somewhat of an uncertainty with me. My number 7 team, I'm going with Ohio State. And this is a team that, again, similar to Michigan, they've lost a lot the last 2 seasons. Obviously, we remember what they lost after the 24 season. They lost, I believe, all 4 of their starters, but they returned a lot of quality depth. 25, they had Caden Curry break out. But this year, they returned Kenyatta Jackson. Is this going to be the year that he is the player that a lot of Ohio State fans hope that he would be? I would argue that they now need him to be that. They need him to be that superior edge player. But I also like what else they brought back. Ohio State also brings back Edric Houston in the defensive tackle rotation. They obviously have James Smith and then Quay Rousseau. Am I pronouncing that last name correctly? The Alabama transfer. The thing that is preventing Ohio State from being higher on this list for me is there's a lot of weight being put into the Alabama transfers. And I think that's somewhat of a boomer bust portal pickup. If it works out, Ohio State's going to be higher than 7th on this list. But if they were who they were at Alabama, I think my ranking of 7 might be about where they're going to be, which is still that of a top 10 defensive line in college football. That's nothing to, stick your nose up at. But them panning out in Columbus is going to play a big role here. And then my number 6 team is Clemson. And this is a team that I'm actually pretty high on, and I have a feeling that the esteemed gentleman sitting below me here on this screen is also pretty high on the Clemson Tigers. I like what they bring back. Will Held, Amari Adams, Vic Beasley, Jaheim Lawson. You're bringing back some really quality players. And I know the biggest headline, they're losing Peter Woods, they're losing TJ Parker. Well, like we've talked about on the show multiple times, they weren't as productive as what some people, like what their NFL draft stock would lead you to believe. I think one of their best, if not the best defensive lineman for Clemson last year is Will Held, and he comes back. They also look to the portal. Clemson doesn't do a whole lot in the portal. They brought in a lot of reinforcements of depth for Tom Allen to utilize in year 2 of his stint at defensive coordinator with Clemson. I think this defensive line is going to shock some people, so I have them at number 6 in my list.
All right, let's get into mine, Trev. My number 10 team is the Clemson Tigers. I'm not quite as high on Clemson as you are, but I think this is a very underrated D-line. I'm very curious to see how people nationally are going to perceive Clemson because I hear a lot of talk about Clemson's not going to be good this year. And look, they lost Peter Woods, who's projected as a first-round pick. I've seen people have TJ Parker projected as a first-round pick. DeMonte Capehart might get picked. Kay Durham was a key rotation guy. Stephylon Green transferred to LSU. Like, I understand why some people aren't as high on it, but I actually like the Clemson returning defensive line, partly because they're going into year 2 under Tom Allen, which should help. I think you were correct. I do agree that Will Helt was their best defensive lineman last year. I know that Peter Woods is the best defensive line prospect, but I watched a lot of times where Peter Woods was very underwhelming for me as a player on film last year. His talent does not always match his production. You know what I mean? So I thought Will Helt, he was definitely their best edge player, led them in pressures last season. I mean, Peter Woods only had 14 pressures last season. I know he's more of a run-first only guy. But I just thought, he was 20 each of the previous 2 years, and he played fewer snaps the previous 2 years. I mean, put it like this. In 2023, he had 301 snaps. In 2024, he played 395 snaps. And in both of those years, he had 20 pressures. And in 2024, he had 7 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. Last year, in 562 snaps, he had 14 pressures and only had 1 more run stop. He's a better player in past years. So they're not losing the guy from 2 years ago. They're losing the guy from last year. He was a good player, but I think replaceable, to be completely honest with you. Will Helt led them. He had 45 pressures and 19 hits plus sacks on the quarterback. Both better numbers than what Boubacar had last year. Very good football player. Jaheim Larson comes back. He had 26 pressures for them last year. I love that. That's one of my favorite under-the-radar DN duos in college football next year. Is those guys. They got London Merritt out of the portal for depth on the edge. They got CJ Wesley out of the portal for depth. They've got some young players that have a shot. Darian Mayo is a kid that I am definitely keeping my eye on, and his projection as a rotation end is a big part of why I like them. The question's going to be up the middle. And for me to have them higher, I need more certainty with Vic Burley, Champ Thompson, guys like that, Marcus Strong, who they got out of the portal from Oklahoma. I'm not as sold on their interior as I am on their edge. If they outplay my ranking, it'll be because the D tackles answer those questions. Can Vic Burley live up to his high school ranking? So far, he hasn't. He's been there 2 years, and he hasn't lived up to that yet, Trev. But he did show some flashes, and I'm very curious to see if this is the year he takes off. I'm projecting a little bit that him and Champ Thompson are going to step up and help them along with some of the the younger play. They're asking a lot of young guys, Heaven Brown Schuler, Maury Adams, a lot of young players to kind of step up. They got a lot of reps last year. Now those guys have to take their game to another level. So if Clemson's going to be that's going to be the key for me. For 9, I have the Georgia Bulldogs. And Trev, part of the thing with the Georgia team is they're very good at what they're asked to do. They were very good at what they were asked to do last year, and that's shut down the run. They were very good at times, I should say. What I like about Georgia is there's a lot coming back from their defensive line room. And there's some very talented young players. I mean, if you look at their top, 10 defensive linemen, they only lose really one of them that played a lot of snaps, and that's Kristen Miller. Everybody else comes back. Joseph Ojonye comes back. Xavier McLeod comes back. Nnamdi Agboku comes back. Elijah Griffin, who is a former 5-star player, he steps up this year. He's going to be more of a bigger part of what they do. I am one of those people that believes he's poised for a breakout season, and him kind of his return is why I think this is a team that has a chance to be a little bit better maybe than we think, or maybe than some people think they're going to be. I like this Georgia D-line. I think Gabe Harris is a good player. It's not the elite D-line they've had in the past, but this is still a quality D-line for what they're asked to do. If they want to rank any higher than this, they've got to be able to get more pressure on the quarterback from this group. They've completely relied on their linebackers to give them pressure, to provide pressure for them the last couple of years. And that's going to have to change a little bit, in my opinion. Number 8 for me is the Ole Miss Rebels. This is an interesting one, Trev, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on what you thought about Ole Miss. You don't have to, but just be curious to hear kind of your thoughts on Ole Miss, because my first thought going into this was there's no way Ole Miss is going to be on my top 10. Number one, they weren't necessarily a great D-line last year, although I think their D-line was the strength of their defense last year. But they lost Princewell to I think he transferred to Florida or LSU. One of their other best pass rushers, Centerine Perkins, is a linebacker for them. Deshaun Womack transferred. Like, there's some guys that are no longer there. They definitely lost some guys from that group, but they've got two of their best pass rushers from last year are both back. Will Eccles is back. He was two of their best players, I should say. Will Eccles is a big D tackle that was a pretty good player for them last year. Cam Franklin was a very good pass rusher for them last season, and I think he takes on an even bigger role this year as sort of an every down player. He was second on their defense in pressures. Will Eccles was number 3 on their defense in pressures. He's a 6'3", 310-pound player who had 39 pressures last year in 15 games. He's a pretty good football player, in my opinion. And then they went to the portal and they got some guys out of the portal as well, Trev. You got Jaheim Otis, who's just, to me, is just more just a space heater you're bringing off the back. But you got Blake Purchase out of the portal from Oregon, who's a good depth player for them last year. Michael Burrow, they got out of the portal from Florida. They've got some incoming freshmen. You've got Andrew Maddox is a guy that was a true freshman last year that played. He's going to help them a lot. I just really like their depth. Jamarius Brown comes back. He was an impactful player for them at nose last year as a sophomore. I really like this Ole Miss defensive line. The secondary and linebacker I got some question marks about, but I do like their D-line. Number 7 for me is the Texas Tech Red Raiders. I think Trev kind of nailed that evaluation. They were a team that obviously built their D-line last year through the portal, and they're doing it again. They do bring back A.J. Holmes, who played a lot for them last year. Jaden Cofield comes back. He played a lot for them last year, but the rest of this is being determined by their transfer portal pickups. I do like Mateen Ibaragba. I'm going to give my best shot to pronounce that, from Wake Forest. He's a good football player. I think Jamon Mathis, who they got out of the portal from Kent State, can help them a little bit. I like Trey White from San Diego State, was a very productive player out of the portal last year. But there's a kid they got that I think is one of the most impactful potential players there is, and he's technically listed as an outside linebacker like David Bailey was, but he's a defensive lineman. And that is Adam Trick out of Miami of Ohio. You don't often think, hey, impact pass rusher, Miami of Ohio, but Trev, this kid is legit good. He had a monster season last year. He had 67 pressures last season. He had 28 hits plus sacks on the quarterback, which is insane. But here's the thing I like. He didn't just do it against the MAC. He had 8 pressures, including 5 hits plus sacks on the quarterback against Wisconsin. He had 4 hits. He had 4 pressures against Rutgers. He had 5 against UNLV. So this wasn't just him out there dominating against Toledo and Buffalo. The fewest number of pressures he had all year last year was 2. He had at least 3 in another game, and in every other game he played in, he had at least 4. So this is a kid that I think has big-time ability, 6'4", 250. He had a pressure against Notre Dame 2 years ago. I remember kind of him as a young, up-and-coming type of player back then. He really exploded onto the scene this past year, Trev, and I think that was a huge pickup. Is he David Bailey? No. But he's still a good football player. And so that's why I've got the Red Raiders number 7. They're relying on the portal again. But at least now they have a better foundation of guys coming back to mix with the portal guys.
Right.
And I think that'll work for them. And then my number 6 team is the Buckeyes. I have them 1 spot ahead of you, Trev. We see them very similarly. I have got some questions about defensive end for them. I actually think Ohio State's going to be pretty good up the middle. Obviously, getting Kenyatta Jackson back is huge. He's a stud. And, I do. I think Edric Houston is going to have a breakout season for them. Will Smith gives them good depth up the middle. You got John Walker out of the portal. Everybody talks about the kid from Alabama. I think John Walker was their best portal pickup on the interior. All you need from James Smith is just do what you did last year. Just be a solid player there. And if he gives you anything beyond that, if he looks like the guy he was a couple years ago, or a few years ago in high school, the 5-star prospect, that's a huge pickup. My bigger concern is on the edge. Obviously, Kenyatta coming back, he's a dude. Like, Kenyatta's a dude. But what's opposite of that? Bo Atkinson wasn't overly impressive for them last year, transferred from North Carolina. They're asking a lot. There's a lot of people saying, Zion Grady is going to be that guy, and maybe Zion Grady is going to be that guy. But this is a kid that played a decent amount of football for them last year, Trev, and had 4 pressures. He played 104 snaps last season and only had 4 pressures. He played basically backup minutes. Now, he's a freshman, but you're asking him to now become this dude for them. And 2 of his pressures last year came against Grambling, and another one came against Purdue. So I have some concerns about the opposite of that. And then, of course, as I said, I like their D-tackle rotation, but I don't know that it's going to be as good as it was last year or even the year before. So I think Ohio State takes a step back on the D-line. I still think it's going to be pretty good.
Yeah.
And, they've got some young kids coming in also that can maybe help out a little bit. Damari Simeon perhaps maybe can help them as a freshman. Kari Wilder's a kid that I absolutely love. Where are they going to play him? Do they play him on the edge right away? like as a big power end. Are they going to play him inside? That could determine how much he plays. But there's a lot of bodies here. I think that's what's going to make Ohio State's D-line good is they may not have the high-level talent of past years outside of maybe Kenyatta, but they're going to be able to throw waves of good players at you. You know what they remind me a lot of, Trev? They remind me a lot of the Notre Dame defensive line in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Where maybe there's not that star outside of maybe one guy, but they just got 2-3 levels of guys that can throw at you and be productive with it. That's where I think the Ohio State defensive line will be this year. And then if Zion Grady is what they hope he is, if Quay Rousseau can kind of be better at Ohio State than he was at Bama, he was a very average player at Alabama. Basically, let's be honest, Ohio State took him and Notre Dame had him visit for one reason and one reason only. He was a package deal with James Smith. They all went after him because they wanted James Smith. That's just a fact. Well, maybe he surprises some people.
Sure.
Maybe one of your stud freshmen can come in and help you this year. And they've got freshmen capable of helping them this year. Maybe Bo Atkinson in year 2 of the system is more impactful for them than he was in year 1. Maybe he can look more like the North Carolina player he was a couple years ago. They're going to need things like that to happen for them to get to that level. But I think Kenyatta Jackson and the potential breakout from Edric Houston are why I like this Buckeye defensive line. And they're going to be coached well.
Yeah.
So there's talent there. It's just not the elite talent they've had in past years, but still a very good defensive line.
Before I dive into my top 5, real quick on Ole Miss, this was a team I had a really hard time placing because a lot of my concern, the common theme that you'll see with my defensive line rankings is I'm a big fan of D-line units that are really strong up the middle. Obviously, there's some outliers, but with Ohio State, again, to Brian's point, it's like that's a team that can come at you in waves. It's something that you're going to see a lot in my top 5. And with Ole Miss, I agree with Brian. I like what they bring back from a pass rushing standpoint. It's their inconsistencies in the run game that gave me a little bit of pause, and I didn't know where to put them. What version of that Ole Miss team are we going to see? Are we going to see the one that held LSU to 57 yards rushing, that held South Carolina to 50? Or are we going to see the one that gave up 262 rushing yards to Mississippi State?
Mm-hmm.
And that was my one hang up with them.
237 to Florida, 241 to Tulane. Actually, that was their offense. But 221 to Arkansas, 221 to Georgia, 262 to Mississippi State. 100%. And then when it mattered, Miami was able to stuff the ball down their throat in the playoffs.
Yeah. That was my one holdup. But again, if that's where I miss, I have them coming in around where Brian has it. But that was
that was my initial concern too, Trev. But when you watch the film, I think their issues in the run game are more related to their linebackers and their scheme. That's where I kind of settled in. Like, you know what? I'm not putting that on the D line. And so we'll kind of see how it goes because I'm a huge Pete Golding defensive scheme fan. Not. So that's kind of where I was. But I think the talent of the D line is pretty good. But it's definitely a group where I'm like, yeah, I have him here, but it's not like I can't believe Trevor. That big idiot, he doesn't have Ole Miss in his top 10. God, why did I hire this freaking guy? I definitely did not feel that. I was like, because there's a lot of other D lines, Louisville, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, but BYU, is another one that I thought about that you're just like, man, just like, okay, they're close, but they're just not quite there. So that's, I think it's the playmaking from Ole Miss that I liked, but I definitely see some of those concerns. Let's go to your top 5 there, Trev.
Number 5, I got the Indiana Hoosiers. Again, sticking with the common theme of being real strong up the middle. They bring back Tyreek Tucker, which I really like. He had a very strong season for them. And then the Hoosiers also bring back Mario Landino. And then I love what they picked up in the portal on the edge. Obviously, we are big fans on this show of Josh Burnham and what he brought to the table for Notre Dame. I think he's going to be very impactful in a Bryant Haynes defense with what he brings to the table. And then the other portal pickup that I liked that they brought in was Toba Yunsensami. I really like that pickup for them. So initial 4 starters for the Hoosiers, I really, really like. I think they're going to surprise some people again. I really do.
Sorry, I was about to. Yeah, go. No, you're nailing it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think they're going to surprise some people again. This was another unit that just didn't get talked about enough. they would talk about how well coached they were. They were kind of getting a little bit of that Notre Dame effect.
That Notre Dame backhanded compliments, like, oh, they're really well coached. Like, no, those are good football players.
Just a bunch of gritty, hard-nosed, coachable guys. It's like, no, these are good athletes. Like,
they're blowing out Alabama, Oregon, and beat Miami because they're just because they're coached well. Yeah, it is that. No, it's the same crap people said about Notre Dame in 2024.
Yeah,
it's like a backhanded compliment.
It is, man. It is, but I think the Hoosiers D-line is here to stay. I mean, I really like what they brought in. My number 4 team is
coached by former Notre Dame defensive lineman Pat Kuntz.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. So you're
welcome. That guy. He was that well coached, overachieving guy. But he's got some dudes he's working with. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah. Maybe he'll bring back the Mohawk for the 2026 season for the Hoosiers coaching staff.
Let's not do that.
My number 4 team, I have the Texas Long.
The answer.
No, I got one my junior year of high school because a lot of the other guys did. Yeah. I know. A lot of interesting hair decisions. I lost a bet in 2017 because I was confident Notre Dame was going to beat Georgia, and I bet a team if they didn't, I was going to get blonde highlights in my hair.
And
they lost. And then afterwards,
burn all that footage.
Yeah, I'll send you over a picture. It's rough. I look like I'm in a K-pop band. It's bad.
Oh God. Please move on to number 4.
Number 4.
I didn't want to still be your friend after. Come on, man. Let's move on.
Number 4, I have the Texas Longhorns. And again, some of this is for what they bring back. I like that they bring back Hero Kanu, and then obviously Colin Simmons returns, and I think he's going to be one of the best premier edge rushers in college football this upcoming season. I get it. I understand why. A lot of the attention in the SEC is going to go to Dylan Stewart in South Carolina. I think Colin Simmons might still be the best edge rusher in that entire conference. He is an absolute dude. Then they went and picked up Ian Gefford. I really like what he's going to be able to do for Texas. He brings them a lot of size. We talked about him ad nauseum when Notre Dame was getting ready to play Arkansas. He was the 6'5", 387-pound guy that made Cameron Ball, their 6'5", 342-pound guy, the small guy in the room. So I like what he's going to be able to do for the Texas defensive line. I like the depth that they have there. This is going to be a very good defensive line. One of the reasons why I'm pretty high on Texas this year is because I think in the trenches, especially on defense, this could be potentially the best that they've been under Steve Sarkisian. So very excited to see what they can do this year. My number 3 team, I actually have the Miami Hurricanes. And I know that a lot of people just pay attention to what they lose. And that's what I've seen from a lot of outlets.
They lost some dudes.
They did. You're losing Akeem Mesidor and you're losing Ruben Bain, 2 guys that are projected to be first-round draft picks, obviously with Ruben Bain projected to go somewhere in the top 10. But look, man, I really like what they bring back. The interior, I like Justin Scott and then Ahmed Moten. The biggest question for them is, okay, with Justin Scott, now that you're going to be the dude, now that you have to step up into that role and the spotlight's on you, how do you perform? Former 5-star kid. I think he's going to rise to the occasion. But what they did on the edge, Marquise Lightfoot steps into a bigger role, and he started to break out a little bit in the postseason. A lot of the attention was going to Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor, but when Marquise Lightfoot got snaps, he was very productive for them. And then obviously going out and picking up Damon Wilson in the transfer portal. Look, we can have all the conversations in the world about how, he is a transfer portal merchant and he's looking for the next biggest deal.
Yep.
Yeah, and he is. But with that being said, his talent is still undeniable.
Still produces.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
That's what I'm saying. So I really like what their makeup is going to be this year. I do have some questions about their depth.
Big time.
Yep. If they are an injury away from this being the number 3 defensive line in the country to I think they're still top 10. Mm-hmm. It's one of those scenarios. So if they're able to stay healthy, and like we know, injuries are a part of the game, who knows? But right now, I have them at number 3 because the talent in their starting front 4 is exceptional. The number 2 team, and this, again, would not shock me if they jumped up to number 1 by the end of the season, but I have Notre Dame. And for all of the reasons that we talked about earlier, not going to harp on it too much, but the depth of talent there is absolutely exceptional. They have the ability to match up with any offense that they face in the regular season. They can match up with Navy, and they could match up with Miami. I mean, this Notre Dame defensive line matches up significantly better, in my opinion, than the defensive line that faced Miami in the first game of the regular season in 2025. I would have loved to see what this defensive line could have done against that unit. That being said, there's still a lot of questions, like we highlighted earlier. There's a lot of projection. And obviously, putting them at number 2, I'm using quite a bit of it here, but the talent is undeniable. I'm going with that. And then my number 1 team that I have is the Oregon Ducks. This is the only team, I believe, of the playoff contenders, because the common theme here is all of these teams are well within the FanDuel odds of winning the national championship.
It's not a coincidence.
No, it is definitely not a coincidence. But I think that they're the only team amongst those that returns all 4 of their starting defensive linemen from this past season. Mateo Uyunglele comes back. The Tuioti kid comes back. Bear Alexander and Amari Washington both come back. I also like some of the depth pieces that they have. I still some questions around it, definitely not as much about Miami, but I love Oregon's defensive line. Not enough people talked about them last year. A lot of the attention went to Dante Moore and the offense and the stigma around Oregon being this, high-powered, offensively driven team. But the one thing that people overlooked, was their defense. Oregon's rush defense last year was spectacular, and their defensive line played a huge part in that. They were able to get after the passer a lot, and I think you're going to see this unit pick up where they left off at the end of 2025. Hopefully not with their final bowl game against Indiana, but by and large, this group for the majority of the season was a very stout group. So I'm a big fan of the Ducks defensive line. So that is my 5-1, Brian.
I dig it. I'm going to just say something here publicly for someone in the chat. If you're a fan of another team and you come into the chat, you want to disagree, put your big boy pants on, be a grown up, and actually tell us why you think we are wrong. Don't just be a child. Okay. We should put like you have to have at least a 70 IQ to chat at Irish Breakdown. Like we should have like an IQ test for some fan bases and other teams. It just blows my mind. Like you have nothing else better to do than to jump into a chat and act like an idiot and just show everyone, hey, I'm an idiot, but let me show everyone how much of an idiot I am. Drives me nuts. Let's jump into our top 5, Trev. My top 5. We got the same number 5. I think this Indiana defensive line is very underrated, just like it was last year.
Yep.
You talk about Tyreek Tucker and Mario Landino coming back up the middle. They showed in the postseason last year when teams tried to run at them, that's not going to work real well. Yeah. Now, the concern for Indiana is outside of those 2, everybody else is pretty much gone. They've got a couple, Daniel and Dukwe, Tyrone Burris. Daniel and Dukwe played a little bit last year. They're relying a lot on the portal. And so I actually have a similar issue for Miami or for Indiana that I do for Miami. I am concerned about Indiana's depth on the inside. If they lose one of Tucker or Landino, there's a big drop-off. That's my big concern. And that honestly is why I considered putting them a spot or 2 lower is that right there. But I really like their defensive ends. And when I look at their edge players, I see, obviously they've got to replace the guys they had last year, but I love Josh Burnham. You guys know that. He was Notre Dame's best defensive end in the second half of last year. You talked about Toby. I like Chidi Obiazar as well.
Yeah.
They were both very good players for Kansas State last year. Very good players. And then they brought in a kid in from Tulsa who's going to be a rotation player inside. Pretty good player for them last year, Trev. So I like Indiana's starting talent. I like their first guy off the bench on the outside and inside. Where I have questions is if you have to get past a third guy at either spot, that's where I have some question marks about Indiana. They cannot afford to have like the injuries that Notre Dame had in 2024.
No.
Like they cannot survive that. They don't have the depth, but their starting talent and their first guy off the bench at both inside and outside is a pretty good football player. But that's why 5 to me is their ceiling right now compared to some other teams. Number 4, I have the Texas Longhorns. And look, Texas is a team, Trev, that I look at and say, actually, I had this backwards.
I was about to.
Yeah, that's your 3. My 4 was the Miami Hurricanes. So I put Trevor's list on here. My 4 was the Miami Hurricanes. At starting lineup wise, I think Miami has as much talent as anybody. Damon Wilson went to Georgia to try to play as well as he could to get the next highest bidder to give him money. They did. Missouri, he went to Missouri, played as well as he could to get the next highest bidder to give him money. They did that. Well, he doesn't have any more bidders. Yeah, he does. It's called the National Football League. So whatever you feel about Damon Wilson jumping from team to team to get the most amount of money, what he's done whenever he's been is ball. He balls out. I mean, so you're not getting some guy that's just going to, well, I got my money, so I'm going to just not do anything now. He gets his money, and then he goes out and he shows like your money was well spent. And, like I'll give him credit for that. So, that's kind of where I'm at with this, is because I think he was the big pickup this offseason. It was kind of like Notre Dame's D tackle room. I had a lot of question marks about what Miami is going to look like until the portal. They needed to really do well in the portal. And Damon Wilson was part of that. He was a big part of that. But he wasn't the only reason for that, Trevor. Another portal pickup that I think is very underrated is Keona Davis, who they got from Nebraska. He's a guy that can play 3 technique. He can play defensive end. He's kind of a do-it-all player. He gives them a really nice depth piece. If this team is going to be a top 5 defensive line, they really need Justin Scott and Marquise Lightfoot to take another step.
Yeah.
They were both real flashy last year. They're going to need more consistency from them. You can get away with flashy when you're a rotation guy. Now they're the guys. And when they were on, they were both very good last season. Ahmed Moten comes back. That was a bit of a surprise that he came back. That was a very good pickup for them. Armando Blunt comes back. He gives them another just good quality, productive edge rusher. They've got some younger players they're going to need to step up. Jarquez Carter, they got out of the portal from Ohio State. He didn't do a lot for the Buckeyes last year, but he's a talented player that can help them a little bit. They got some incoming freshmen that could provide some depth. So I do have some question marks about their proven depth. There's bodies there, but there's question marks. So I agree with you, Trev. I think that the depth is the thing that needs to emerge this offseason. But you'd stack a starting lineup of Damon Wilson and Marquise Lightfoot on the edge and Justin Scott and Ahmed Moten on the inside. That's as good of a starting 4 as you're going to find in college football.
Yeah.
And like my 1, 2, 3, my 1 was clear, but my 2, 3, 4, I have Notre Dame 2. There's debate to be had with Miami and Texas. And I'll explain why Texas is where they were next. But it's the depth concerns that have Miami where I have them. And the fact that you've got guys kind of stepping into roles where they're going to be asked to do things they weren't asked to do in the past. That's going to be the big key for me.
Get that completely.
Yeah. So then next, my number 3 was the Texas Longhorns. So when I look at Texas, I understand their defense wasn't that great last year. I get that. There's a lot of reasons for that. Losing Ethan Burke hurts. I get that. Losing Cole Brevard hurts. Losing Travis Shaw hurts. But you remember what I said last year, Trev. I did not think Texas's D-line was going to be that good last year. I didn't like the Cole Brevard pickup. I didn't like the Travis Shaw pickup. I thought they were both just kind of okay players that everybody was acting like they were going to be impact players. I feel differently about their portal class this year, which is actually smaller. Number 1, I did like the Murad Watson pickup. He didn't pan out, but he was young. He was true sophomore, redshirt freshman or redshirt sophomore last year for them. He was okay. He showed some flashes. I think going into year 2, he's going to be a lot better off. I think there was a jump for him. He was going from playing in the ACC to playing in the SEC. Very different deal. Him coming back helps. You get Ian Jaffrard coming back, who's literally made Cameron Ball look small. 6'5", 380. He struggled against Notre Dame. He was pretty good the rest of the year. And he's a big physical kid that moves surprisingly well for a guy that's close to 4 bills, right? I mean, when you watch his film, he's not going to mistake you for Riley Mills athletically or anything like that, but he can move for that size. He's not just a stiff he's not Terrence Cody, where he's just there to eat up 3 blockers at a time. He can push, he can shoot gaps and occupy space in different ways. But that is primarily what you're bringing him in to do. That frees up Hero Canoe to be more of a penetrator and a pass rusher. Alex January is a kid that was a young kid that got good experience last year. I think it's going to take another jump this year. The question is going to be, how good are they going to be on the edge opposite Colin Simmons? Because he is, in my opinion, the best returning defensive end in college football. There's a question mark there, but the question marks are going to be filled by Lance Jackson, who's a elite freshman talent last year that played a bunch for them last year. You got Zena Umeo Zulu, who was a former relatively highly ranked kid that was a redshirt freshman last year, gave them good quality minutes. You got Justice Terry last year, was a true freshman that gives them depth. He's kind of an big end kind of player that I think he comes back now and he gained valuable experience. So, like, they had some guys who weren't that good last year that are now gone, and they had a lot of young kids. I mean, even Colin Simmons was a true sophomore last year, Trev. Like, they had like 5 or 6 freshmen or sophomores in their rotation last year. You don't want that in the D-line. So that is why I think their D-line underachieved, but I think they got better as the year went on, and now you've jumped into where they're going to be juniors and sophomores, and I think the talent starts to take over. And they've got a lot. The only guy that they lost that I felt was a loss was Ethan Burke. That's it. I think they upgraded. I think Ian Giffard is a lot better player than what Cole Brevard and Travis Shaw were. I think it was a much better pickup. And then you've got some stud freshmen coming in. So I really like this Texas defensive line. I think they're going to take another jump this season and be what a lot of people thought they were going to be last year. But even last year, Trev, they were still pretty good.
Yeah,
you know, at times. I mean, they were young, and a lot of their issues last year were just young guys making young guy mistakes. But you know, I don't know that there's a better defensive end coming back than Colin Simmons. You know, getting Hero Canoe back is big. Lance Jackson, I think, is a kid that I'm looking for from a breakout. I think Zena is going to be a really good rotation player. Justice Terry, I just like the God-given ability, and at some point in time, the talent takes over. And what keeps the talent from taking over is youth. That's not as big of an issue for them this year because the experience a lot of those guys got. So I really like this Texas defensive line. My number 2 is Notre Dame. You could argue that Notre Dame has the best 1-2-3 punch coming back in college football at defensive end. When you look at what Boubacar Traore did last season, over 10-plus tackles for loss last year, 6.5 sacks last year, over 30 pressures last year, in really his first full season of playing college football. He only played 5 games the year before, tore his ACL. He spent all last year in that year 1 from an ACL. He's now going to be 2 years removed from the ACL. He's already productive even without that. He improved as a run defender this season. And then you throw in Bryce Young and Keon Keeley, 2 former 5-star recruits that are now going into years where they're expected to be a lot more effective. The depth at defensive end, as we discussed the other day, remains a question mark. But you've got 2 incoming freshmen who are top 50 recruits. You've got Logan Thomas, who's played key minutes, and then you're hoping that another veteran can step up and give you depth. Defensive tackle, I think the only question for Notre Dame is, do they have a star? But they're as deep as anybody in the country at defensive tackle now. Getting Jason Onye back for a 6th year, getting Francis Brew and getting Tion Gray out of the portal, getting Armo Mukum to come back, on top of Elijah Hughes returns, on top of Chris Burgess, a former top 100 recruit, goes into his 2nd year. You got 2 talented incoming freshmen coming in this year as well. There's loads of depth, great size. They've got 6 guys that are over 300 pounds on their defensive line. Notre Dame this year. Their defensive ends are 6'4", 250, 6'7", 275, and 6'5", 270. This is the biggest defensive line Notre Dame has had since 2012 when they were a 3-4 team. Yeah. You know what I mean? And so size, athleticism, and then proven production. There's a lot of proven production coming back. I mean, I think Boubacar is the only defensive end who hasn't played in the playoffs. Bryce Young has, because remember, I got this wrong the other day. I was like, I think Keon's the only guy. And then no, it's like, no, Bryce played in 24. Logan Thomas played in the playoffs in 24. Logan Thomas was on the field on that 4th down against Georgia as a true freshman when they sacked Gunnar Stockton in that game. So I look at it and I say, there's depth, there's star talent, and they are big and physical. And that's why I have Notre Dame number 2. And then my number 1 defensive line is Oregon. They had a very interesting offseason. Their defensive line was very good last season. And if the only time you watched them play was the Indiana game in the postseason, then you probably think we're nuts for having them number 1. But
sure.
I just think that team just didn't show up. I do count Teote as a defensive lineman. He's technically listed as an outside linebacker. So is Mateo Uiagalelei. They're defensive ends. I don't care what they're defensive ends. We count them as defensive linemen. Bear Alexander comes back. He was surprisingly good for them last year, Trev. Like, yeah, you know, we give Bear a tough time, deservedly so, because he is like, you know, when you look up football mercenary in the dictionary, there's a picture of Bear Alexander there. I mean, that kid's what has he been, like 8 schools in the last 9 years when you include college and then high school? He played at like 3 or 4 different high schools. He was good for them last year. There was some, I don't know if he actually declared and came back, but there was some thought that Amari Washington might go to the portal. He decided to stay, and getting him to stay was huge. Now, they lost a lot of their depth behind him, but the reason they lost a lot of the depth behind him, Trevor, is because all the starters are coming back.
Yeah.
And those guys wanted to play. And, and what's funny is you look at Bear Alexander and how big he is. He's 6'3", 302. He's by far their smallest defensive tackle. Amari Washington, 6'3", 330. Tion Gray was 6'6", 330. Their 2 edge players are 6'3", 263, and 6'5", 272. They've got size. You look at what they did in the portal. They went out and got experienced, proven players out of the portal. DeAndre Robinson from North Carolina played a bunch last year. You got him out of the portal. You've also got some talented young players like Aiden Breland, who played a decent amount last year as a freshman, redshirt freshman. This year, Wyatt is a really talented kid that I think is going to be a major part of the edge rotation this next year. Perhaps we could see more of Elijah Rushing this season, but I feel like with what they have coming in out of the portal and what they signed in high school, there's plenty of depth there to have. They won't have the depth they had last year. It's still going to be good. But their starting 4 is as good as anybody in the country, and it's more proven. There's a world in which Notre Dame's front 4 could end up being better than Oregon's front 4, but I know that right now Oregon's front 4 is better.
Right.
Well, Notre Dame got Tion Gray. Yeah, who was a backup to Barry Alexander and Amari Washington last year. You know what I mean? So it's like you're excited about the guy you got from a school where he was a backup to those other 2 guys, and he was a good football player. But I think this Oregon D-line from a starting lineup standpoint is as good as any in the country. The depth stepping up is going to be what determines if they can stay number 1. And it's not a coincidence, Trevor, that these 5 teams right here that we have as the top D lines are also considered the top teams in college football coming back next year. And those are teams that I look at and say, I think these guys are capable of being elite players. That makes things, they have potential to have elite defensive lines.
Yeah.
And if you have an elite defensive line, you got a shot of being an elite football team. I think you look at the last 3 years of college football, there's only one team that made it to the championship game that I didn't think had an elite defensive line, and they were still a good defensive line. That's Washington. Michigan had an elite defensive line. Ohio State had an elite defensive line. Notre Dame's defensive line was very good and would have been elite if not for Boubacar, Patelho, Mills, and Cross, and Rubio, and Onye all having injuries. And then this past year, Indiana and Miami both had big-time defensive lines.
Yeah.
That's still a very important ingredient to winning championships in college football, which is why, what'd you say the FanDuel odds are? Who are the top 5 teams in the FanDuel odds for national championship, Trev? You had said something like that earlier. Who are the top 5?
Yeah. The top 5 right now, as it stands, is it's Notre Dame. They lead the way. And then you go through and you look at who's next behind them. You have Ohio State, Texas, Indiana, Oregon. I mean, again, to your point.
For the top 6 defensive lines.
Not a coincidence.
Yeah. Yep. And Miami's not in there, right? I would assume, right?
Not
too
up
far
at the top, but they're not far off. I mean, you have, outside of the top 5 that I just listed off, you still have Georgia, Texas Tech, Miami. Actually, one that they're just not crazy high on that we've talked about, or some that we've talked about in here, like Ole Miss and Oklahoma are tied at plus 3,000, but outside of that, by and large, they're all ranked at the top. That's the biggest thing. And to your point, definitely not a coincidence. Definitely not.
No, it's definitely not a coincidence. These are very good defensive lines, which is partly why these teams are also considered some of the best teams in college football coming back next year. No doubt about it.
Well,
that was fun.
Good stuff, that was. Bro. I love doing top 10s, bro.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're just so much fun. And it's kind of cool that once you start watching the season unfold, it's like, hey, we talked about him in February.
Well, it's also more fun because Notre Dame genuinely has top 10 units at all these places, right? Too. It's like, hey, we're going to do top 10. Are you guys going to be talking about Notre Dame? No, not really. But, I'm sorry. If you don't have Notre Dame in the top 10 on the defensive line, you're not dealing in reality. You're dealing in reputation. You're dealing in what you think, not what is. And so I'm excited to see what this group's going to be. But just there's a lot of really potentially good offensive lines. Texas A&M, I felt weird not having them, but they're just too driven by portal guys stepping up. Louisville's got, they've got another team's like, there's too many portal questions for me for Louisville, but the kid they got coming back, I think it's Clev Lubin is his name. I don't know if if you guys in the chat have seen a whole lot of him, but if you don't know about Clev Lubin, check him out. 64 pressures last year, 25 hits plus sacks in the quarterback.
Yeah, he's a dude.
He's an absolute dude. Had 33 run stops for them last year. It's just everybody after him is gone. So it's like, but they were on my list. Oklahoma I had right on the fringe of my list, Trev. You had Georgia and Ole Miss, who I had in my top 10, on the fringe of your top 10. There's a lot of really good D-lines coming back, or potential D-lines coming back. But so many teams relying on the portal is what makes this such a question mark for me about who's going to be there. I know there's some people that are really excited about LSU's potential defensive line. I'm just not as excited about that group. I just think some of the portal pickups they got were good players, but maybe not what some people think they're going to be. They lost a lot from last year, but they have some talented young players ready to go too. Dominic McKinley is a guy to keep an eye on. They got some talented young players, but is Jordan Ross going to be that guy? They got the Princewell kid from Ole Miss, who's a very productive player. How good is Stephylan Green? We'll find out. So there's some good defensive lines that aren't on this list that we're going to look back and be like, yeah, I didn't have them, but they ended up being a pretty good D-line. But I feel pretty good about my top 7.
Oh, yeah.
Like after that, there was some for me.
Yeah.
But top 7, I'm like, yeah, those are definitely the top 7 defensive lines of college football coming back. No doubt.
And I'd be shocked if they didn't in some way end the season in the top 7 or around it. But so I'm with you. My 8 through 10, it's kind of like, okay, they're either going to be higher or they might not be in the top 10 given a circumstance. I'm with you completely. Yep. Well, folks, that is going to do it for part 3 of today's show. Don't go anywhere. We're getting ready to wrap everything up today with a mailbag. So get your questions in there, get your comments in there. Looking forward to answering those. But before we get to that, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know whenever we go live. Whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, the best way to support what we do here, and especially now that it's the offseason, Brian's going to have film breakdowns out. We're going to continue breaking down this roster and this depth chart. It is truly, and I know people in the chat will attest to this, it is really the best place to stay in tune with everything Notre Dame football. So be sure you are a premium message board subscriber at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, on the final segment of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we're taking everything home with a daily mailbag, a little sneak preview for the Friday free-for-all mailbag that we have going on tomorrow. But if you want your question, comment, concern answered, we've spent a lot of time talking about D-lines across college football today, Notre Dame's defensive line. Any questions, go ahead, throw them in the chat. Put MB for mailbag or a little mailbox emoji next to it. That lets us know to set that question aside. We can't go forever. So if you want your question answered, you can always put in a super chat, and that will also get bumped to the top as well.
Let's get started, Trev, with Trev's bicycle glasses.
Love it. What is your all-star defensive line lineup with a 3-4 front, a 4-3 front, a 3-3-5 front? Don't need to answer all, just giving various options or suggestions.
Well, 3-3-3-4 front, that one is probably a little bit easier for me to do because there's some really good big D tackles coming back this year. Obviously, we talked about one, Amari Washington would be a guy that I would strongly consider as a nose. AJ Holmes is a kid that I think could kind of be like a 3-4 defensive end coming back next year. The kid from Texas Tech, who's like I said, the only guy that they've really got coming back. The rest is going to be portal pickups. Colin Simmons on the edge, I'll probably put him there. In a 4-down, it's probably Colin Simmons and the kid from South Carolina whose name is Dylan Stewart, whose name was escaping me for a second there. But they're probably on the end for me. They're probably my 2 edge players. I know a lot of people talk about John Henry Daly from from Michigan, if he was healthy, that would probably be a no-brainer. He was super productive last season, Trev, but I've heard some things that his knee is maybe a little worse than some people are letting on. So that would be a bit of a concern for me. Another Big Ten kid that I think has a shot to be in that is, I don't know if you guys have seen Anthony Smith or not, but he's a really good football player from Minnesota. 6'6", 275, 280 pound, deep, power end. He could also be one of those 3-4 ends, and then you can maybe put Colin Simmons as your stand-up edge rusher in a 3-4. That actually probably would be where I would go, but that's probably my ideal. My 3-3-5 is not going to look a whole lot different than my 3-3-4, my 3-4 from a defensive lineman standpoint. That's just going to look different from a linebacker standpoint. I'm going to have 3 true linebackers on there as opposed to, three downs, but it's probably the same lineup. So let's just in a 3-4, I'd go Amari Washington, AJ Holmes, and Anthony Smith would be my 3 downs, and then Colin Simmons is my 3-4 outside linebacker that rushes the quarterback. In a 3-3-5, take out Anthony Smith, put Colin Simmons in at defensive end because I ain't taking Colin Simmons off the field.
Yeah.
So that would probably be my lineup.
Yeah, you and I see the 3-4 and the 3-3-5 very much the same. It's so hard to go against Colin Simmons and Dylan Stewart in a 4-down front. That's just so difficult. I'm with you, man. That would be a nasty D-line unit. Yeah. But wouldn't surprise me if our guy Boubacar made his way up into that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, he's got to take that jump, though, right? He's not in that group right now, but he has a strong offseason. I mean, some of the guys that I'm talking about, like, let's just go look at some of the numbers of some of the guys that I was just talking about, Trev. So, Anthony Smith, first of all, the kid from Oregon would be on there before Anthony Smith would be, the Tioto kid as a 3-4. He had 16 tackles for loss and 9 sacks last season, but the kid from Minnesota, let me just look him up real quick. Let me see, national tackles for loss. Just give me one sec. So Anthony Smith last year had 17 and a half tackles for loss and 12 and a half sacks in the Big Ten. This isn't a kid that did it at Rice or something you know what I mean? He did that in the Big Ten. There's another level that Boubacar is going to have to get to if he wants to be there. The reason I said John Henry Daly, if I knew he was healthy, he was a 17 and a half tackle for loss, 11 and a half sack guy last year. There's too many of those kind of guys. Colin Simmons, as a true sophomore last year, had 15 and a half tackles for loss and had 12 sacks last year. So, Boubacar can get there. There's no doubt he can get there. I think he's closer to Dylan Stewart than maybe some people want to admit.
Sure.
And he was a little bit more productive last year as a pass rusher, maybe not quite as well against the run, but the Colin Simmons, the Anthony Smiths, those guys are much higher level of production. Am I shocked if Boubacar's in that conversation next year? Nope, not at all. But a preseason list, I just couldn't have him there just yet. But I think you are correct. He could be in that conversation quickly.
Yeah,
quickly.
Good
way to start us off. Trev's buy so hold glasses. Let's go from Justin Indy Sniper.
What can Freeman and staff do to keep all the talent on the roster satisfied and away from the portal in following seasons?
I think just keep doing what you're doing and maybe enhance your rotation a little bit. I think, number one of the things that's helped, Trev, is they've been honest with kids when they recruit them. They don't promise kids playing time. They don't promise them this. They don't promise them that. They sell Notre Dame. So kids get here, they understand the value of being at Notre Dame. And so they're willing to put up with a little bit more. And I think that level of honesty when you recruit them, that's my biggest concern with the new coaching staff, is you don't have any of the seasoned vets on the defensive staff to say, hey, guys, this is how we recruit at Notre Dame. You're going to need Marcus Freeman to make sure he does that. This is the kind of kid we bring in Notre Dame. This is the kind of, and you're going to need them. That's the hardest adjustment that I think they're going to have, is because they're going to think, man, I'm at Notre Dame. I can go after this stud kid. I'm oh, hold on a second now. That. You may be able to get that kid at Notre Dame, but he shouldn't be at Notre Dame. You need to make sure that they don't fall victim to that. But that's been a big part of it. They do value playing a deeper rotation. That's just something they've done. They played at times 10 defensive linemen last year. That's a pretty good way of keeping your defensive line happy. Linebacker. Why didn't they lose Jalen Sneed or Jaden? Because they're all going to play, and they all have very valuable roles. Same thing in the secondary. So I think that's a big part of it, is playing your guys, playing your depth, and then just having some honesty. I'm still shocked they didn't lose any offensive line.
That blows my mind.
Because you can't play them. You can't just rotate 5 offensive linemen throughout, a backup offensive lineman throughout a game. That's one position where you kind of need some continuity. So I'm still floored by that. So, but I think a big part of it is you're recruiting the right kind of kids that aren't coming here for the money. They're coming here. That's an important piece, but it's not the driver. That's what I've always said to young men. Do not make a decision based off money as the driver. Now, if you like 2 schools and one school's offering you a big NIL deal and the other one's not, then pick the school that's giving you the most money. But if this is your best school, but this school down here that otherwise would be 3rd or 4th on your list is offering you a ton of money, don't take it. Go here. It's a better fit. You'll fit, all those things are more important. It's a better long-term investment in your betting on yourself. And Notre Dame has done a pretty good job of not bringing in a bunch of the I'm only coming here because of money kids. And I think that's a big part of doing it. But the other part is keep winning. I've said this a million times. Kids are more willing to stick around when you're winning. Because the reason is look, I've seen it happen in Notre Dame. I've seen it happen in other schools. Remember Alabama used to do this. They'd have 5-star linebackers just kind of play special teams and be rotation guys for 2 years, not play a ton. And then they step up as juniors. They become All-Americans themselves and off to the NFL, off to the first round. And that's the big thing is okay, so you've got these guys that don't play a ton and, you're about to have a backup running back picked in the 2nd round of the NFL draft. You know what I mean? Eli Raridan sits for 3 years, doesn't become a starter till year 4, and he's about to get drafted. I think those things help a lot that you're able to, turn those guys into NFL football players. And so I think just keep doing that and you're going to be fine. You're going to continue to keep guys happy and keep putting guys in the NFL and keep winning a ton of games. But at the end of the day, it starts with recruit the right type of kids that understand what Notre Dame is all about.
Yep.
And that have bought into that.
It's transparency, trust, and communication. I mean, Mylan Graham in his opening press conference at Notre Dame, one of the first things that he talked about was how much he trusted this coaching staff. He's been on campus for 3 weeks. You know what I mean? So I think that speaks volumes about what Notre Dame is building currently.
Yep.
I agree. From Tommy Tough Nuts. Hey, guys.
Just real quick, do you see what the shirt says in the avatar?
Yes, I do.
Picture of Lincoln Riley that says Marcus Freeman is my daddy. That is great. That is great.
From Tommy. Hey, guys. So we know Coach Free gets a statue for a title, but how many would he need to get his name over a gated entrance? Or if he does well enough, would it be Freeman Field at Notre Dame Stadium?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to get his name on an entrance because there's only it's not like there's an unnamed entrance just waiting on another Hall of Fame coach, and they're not going to tear down Era's, this is no longer Air Parsegian tunnel, this because Marcus Freeman now has more. I think the tunnels are kind of what they are. The entrances are kind of what they are. I think it's more so about the legacy. It's I don't know that it's, the statue's the thing we all joke about, right? Get his statue made. Beyond that, I don't know that there's a lot they're going to do. When Marcus Freeman retires after hopefully, 3-4 national titles, right? He better have a whole lot of money if he wants the field to be named Freeman Field. But that's not who Notre Dame is. It's not Rockne Field. It's not Leahy Field. It's not Lou Field. It's not Era Field. It's Notre Dame Stadium. And I want that always to stay the same. I don't need it to be Freeman Field. Now, I could see them maybe naming, putting his name on a practice facility or, that'd be cool. But it's not, I don't see any of the gates changing. Those are kind of like the OGs. They're the coaches who have their names on a gate are the coaches who laid the foundation for what the program is. He'll get his statue and he'll go down in lore with multiple championships, but I think that's going to be the key. But if you really want to get that kind of praise to where you got to win at least 2, maybe more. You got to get on Era's level at least, and that's 2 championships. And if Era would have ducked USC like USC is currently ducking Notre Dame, Era might have had 5 or 6 championships.
Very true. Very true. Here's all I'll say. If Marcus Freeman does enough in his tenure at Notre Dame to have this even be a discussion, I'll go build a gate myself. I'll just go chisel it into the side of Notre Dame Stadium and just be a little door that says Freeman entrance. Look, man, that I just want to see one. Want to see one.
I think Brian Kelly should have his name on an entrance at Notre Dame Stadium. Like maybe under one of the tunnels where you walk into the place with all the urinals and stuff like that. Like maybe put Brian Kelly's name right up under there, right up above there. That'd be pretty cool. I think he deserved that and earned that from his time at Notre Dame.
The Kelly Lavatory.
Yeah. I think that fits, don't you?
From our guy Salty. Oh, which 5 teams do you think have the best chance to make the college football playoffs? And of those 5, which school is most likely to not do so?
The BK Urinal Kings. That sounds good to me. I would say Notre Dame, in no order, Notre Dame, Oregon, Texas. Boy, to make which teams have the 5 best to make? I would say Texas Tech, and the reason I go Texas Tech is because it's about making the playoff. Part of that is what is your path to making the playoff. So my top 3: Notre Dame, Texas, Oregon, Texas Tech, and Miami. I think have the 5 best odds to me because again, it's not so much who are the 5 best teams. You asked who has the best chance to make the playoff. And I think those teams, because Notre Dame could beat Miami by 100, and as long as they win the ACC, it doesn't matter. And so Texas Tech, to me, I think their path to the championship is clear. I don't think it's as clean as it was last year because, I don't think they're going to be quite as good as they were last year. I think the Big 12 as a whole is going to be a little bit better this year. But they're still the class of the Big 12. I mean, they only played, 2 competitive Big 12 games all year? And I believe they were both with Baron Morton on the sidelines. Arizona State. There was one other competitive game, wasn't there? Am I forgetting another?
No, I think they won all their other ones by like double digits significantly.
Let's see here. There was one other game that was competitive for a while. They ended up pulling away. Maybe it was Houston. Was it Utah? They had another game that was close for a while, but they were the point though is, Trev, they were the class of the Big 12 last year, and very clearly. The only other team that could even remotely close to say they might have been a playoff team was BYU, and they smoked BYU twice. I mean, the only reason the first game was even as close as it was early was because Texas Tech kept settling for field goals. I mean, if they could have punched a couple of those, it was Utah was 10-3 at halftime. It was actually 10-3 going into the fourth quarter. And then Texas Tech scored 24 points in the fourth quarter. That's what it was. That's a competitive game. 10-3 going into the fourth quarter. And then Houston was not. It was 25-11 at the end of at halftime, and then 28-11, 35. Yeah, it was the Houston game, or the Utah game was the one that was close for a while, and then Texas Tech buried them in the fourth quarter. But that's it. Two out of your 9 conference games were moderately competitive, and like, as we said, one of them you didn't have your start. You lost a game because your starting quarterback didn't play. But I don't think that Morton didn't play against. He didn't play against Utah either. I don't believe.
No, he did not.
So the only 2 close games you played all year, you didn't have your starting quarterback.
Yeah, because I remember making a prediction for that game when we talked about it in one of our Thursday shows. And I was like, they're not going to have Baron Morton. Let's see what happens. And then they won 35-10. Yeah. So, yeah.
Yep. All right, let's go to one that was from Salty. Let's get down here to Andre Tonsil.
In each position group, what player, if they make jump off in the spring, will bring a biggest value to the defense's fall? You can do the offense if you want as well.
Thank you, Andre. D-line, the guy whose jump will have the biggest impact to me on the defensive line, it's Bryce Young.
Yep.
At linebacker, it would be Kingston or Jalen Sneed because of their pass rush value. Right. So, you know what I mean? Secondary, it would be Christian Gray. That's my 3 on defense. If they have a big jump, it has the biggest impact.
Yeah. The only other one that I would probably add to the linebacker one is Madden Faramo.
Yeah.
That would probably be mine. Because while Kingston's working his way back from injury, you don't really have another player that can step in and rotate in at Mike that much.
Sure.
Like Osbury could. I don't think Sneed could. Not at this point in his career.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I agree with what you're saying with the pass rushing aspect. That's for sure.
How about offense, Trev?
Yep. It's just about to say.
I went defense first. I'll let you do offense first.
Yeah. Each position group. I mean, if I'm going quarterback, I'll probably say Blake Hebert. Like locking up the number 2 quarterback spot. And some of that, yes, I understand CJ has to make a jump. I don't think he's a finished product. I just have a lot of confidence that that's going to happen. The uncertainty comes from who's going to be his backup and what happens. Running back, I will say it'll be Kedron Young, like what his health is going to be going into this offseason, what that's going to look like for him. Because he tore his ACL in May. I believe it was after spring, but before like summer workouts started. So the state of his health will be very interesting to see what his workload will be. The receiving core, Cam Williams, just for a lot of the reasons that we listed off. Tight end, what kind of jump does James Flanagan make from, freshman to sophomore? What kind of jump does he make? And then offensive line, I'm going Will Black. Does he give them a reason to move Anthony Knapp inside?
Hopefully he already has, based on our conversation yesterday. Quarterback, I'm going to go CJ Carr because at the end of the day, your starter defines your team. And your analysis makes a ton of sense for depth, but I'm still going CJ. Running back, agree, it's Kedron. Wide receiver, Cam was my first thought. You took Cam out. Here's another one, Quincy Porter.
Yeah.
I think he's another one who's jumped this offseason, is huge. Tight end, James Flanagan. There is no other pick. And then offensive line, I just, if it's not Will Black, because I don't even include Jagasol as making a jump. He doesn't need to make a jump. He can be the same exact guy he was in the playoffs of 2024. He just has to be on the field.
Literally, Jags just has to
I don't need him to be better than what he was in the games he's played in. I just need him to be healthy.
Yes.
So I don't include him in the jump. Will Black needs to make a jump. You're playing left tackle, bro. You need to make that jump. And if Will Black is what we hope he can be in year 2, with Gerby at tackle and Knapp at guard and Sullivan Absher at guard and Ashton Craig at center, even if you don't have Jagasol, that's one heck of an offensive line.
Heck yeah.
And if you get Jagasol back, then good night, So those would be mine. Those are good picks, Trev. And then anyone at kicker. I want someone to put anything less than 40 yards through the uprights consistently. And look, we're not talking enough about it. Spencer Porath was a huge portal pickup.
Yes.
I just need to see him. Look, he drilled 3 field goals against Notre Dame last year, including one from 48 yards. But kicking a field goal when you're down 28-13 in a game, no one thinks you're going to win, is a little different than kicking a field goal of 48 yards when you're the favorite and it's in a big stage or the play. I got to see that, but the kid was pretty money last year. He was pretty good last year. Reminds me a little bit of Justin Yoon. He doesn't have the leg strength that Justin had a stronger leg than people realize, but similar body type, accuracy type of thing. He does remind me a little bit of Justin as far as just what the ball looks like coming off of his leg.
That is a promising comparison.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. All right, let's go to one here's one from Aaron Valerio.
What made y'all fans of Notre Dame football? For me, it was my dad who influenced me and my brothers to be avid fans. Always been something special about Notre Dame.
That's the same thing for both Trev and I. And your grandpa also, you had said, played a big role. So Trev's dad and his grandpa. For me, it was my dad. My dad was a Notre Dame fan. He was always more of an NFL guy than a college guy. but his college team was Notre Dame. And so I just remember watching Notre Dame games as a kid, 10 years old, 88 season, and just fell in love with it, and just the sense of Notre Dame being different was something that really I was attracted to. I've never been a go with the crowd kind of guy, even as a kid. I just always, just was a little bit different in that regard. But I mean, they were different than everybody else, like they were the school that did it the right way and all this, the Catholic school. Even though I'm not Catholic, I just kind of like the idea that they stand for something, and at least that's kind of what I thought it was like when I was a kid. So that was really a big part of it. And then the more you watch, the more you become a fan. I eventually became a much bigger fan than my dad was. And I think that's usually how it goes, right? Like, it's like you become an even bigger fan than the person who got you to fall in love with it. So, I mean, still to this day, my dad will call and I'm like, "Hey, B, how? I'm just checking on you." And he's like, "Man, we'll talk for like 2 minutes." Then all of a sudden, my dad immediately turns it in. "Let's talk Notre Dame." It's like, "All right, let's go. Let's roll." Like, we can talk Notre Dame now, which I love. But just like being able to share those moments, like Trevor, you and your dad getting to sit in Notre Dame Stadium during a playoff game last year, right after losing your grandpa, and just the memories that, flowed in. Me and my dad, our first trip to Notre Dame, watching him play USC, knowing my dad's, I got my dad tickets to playoff game last year too. I've actually had my dad. So my dad helps me cover some games where none of my staff can go. And so like a lot of the charting and stuff that Vince does and Trevor will do during games when they're there with me, my dad will do. So like being able to share that with him has been pretty cool as well. He's been at Notre Dame Stadium a couple times, helping me out. He goes with me to road games to help me out. And then the coolest one was, I think it was 2017 when Notre Dame played USC. The band Chicago played at halftime. And I had gotten my parents tickets to the game. That's my dad's favorite band.
Nice.
So that was pretty sweet. Yeah, that was pretty awesome. But yeah, it's dad. It's like you, Aaron. It's our dads.
Yep.
Yeah.
From sine, cosine, tangent, how weird is it seeing and referring to accounts like Trev's Bisa Hold Glasses and Brian's Balloons LLC?
Very.
Yeah.
Very weird. Especially when they put our picture there. I've seen my name used before, but that's the first one that used my picture. That was noticeably my picture. Buddy Andy has my picture on his avatar on the because I had taken a picture a few years ago of me wearing my college helmet, and he took that and uses that. But that's the only other one that has that my picture, and that's what makes it weird. So it's weird saying my name, and it's also weird seeing my picture, but get used to it after a while.
Yeah, I saw my picture on Trev's account before I saw the name, and I was like, did I put a question in? I was tripping for a second, so it was pretty funny.
Yep. Here we go. Here's one from Salty.
Should Mike Tyson be fighting Floyd Mayweather?
No. I mean, I guess if he needs the money, but guys, you are legends. Like, just go out peacefully. It's bad enough that I had to watch him fight Jake Paul. That was sad. Like, just genuinely sad to see. I still think it was rigged also. But I guess if you need the money, whatever. But, I mean, he was taking shots from Jake Paul. I know Floyd's a little older, but Floyd still has fast hands. A slowed down version of Floyd Mayweather is still faster hands than most of the human population. Like, it's just, why are we doing this? I don't know. Is that a thing, Trev? Like, are they going to fight or something like that? Or is that
they're going to do an exhibition match.
How long? Is it just a few rounds to raise money?
I have no idea.
Like, if they're doing it for charity, fine. Because then they're not trying to hurt each other. They're just out there just, raising money. But if it's like a real fight, even if it's a real exhibit, no, I don't want to see that, man. I don't want to see that.
Agreed. From Tommy Toughnuts, what's the target number of offensive line in the next recruiting class, and how many of those need to be tackle prospects?
4 is probably my number. I think you get away with 3. How many need to be tackle prospects? I always want more tackle prospects than interior guys. I think tackle players can move inside. They've already got 2 offensive line commits, and that's James Holter and Richie Flanagan. Richie's an interior player. James projects as a tackle. I would take 1 more tackle and 1 more interior if that interior is like an Albert Simeon type of talent. otherwise I'd say shoot for 2 tackles. Cause like Cam Wagner could move inside the guard if you needed him to. He's that kind of guy. You know, I mean, there's a world in which James Halter could be a Billy Schrouth type guard if the need is there. You know, if there's already 2 tackles in trench and they've got multiple years and you're like, dude, you're one of our best 5, but you're not one of our best 2 tackles. Movement to guard, I could see that. But I'd like to give him a shot at tackle as long as I can. He's a good football player. I really like James Halter. So I think 4 is the maximum number. I don't think you're going to go beyond that unless you have some departures this offseason. So that's where I'm at. That's still a pretty young offensive line for Notre Dame. I mean, there's still a lot of guys with a lot of eligibility left. But I'd go 4.
Yeah.
Because you took 6 last year. I mean, you know what I mean? So it's like taking that extra guy last year, Matt, you didn't need to take as many this year.
From Salty, 2 more Georgia players, linebackers, have been arrested for reckless driving offenses. What is the source of this culture? It would seem that Smart runs a tight ship.
He runs a tight ship on the football field. That's a big difference. When young people know there's no accountability for their actions if they're really good players, they're going to act like immature young men. Why did I act a fool when I was 18, 19, and 20 years old? Because I had a father that would not allow me to act a fool when I was 18, 19, 20 years old. And you had football coaches that would not allow you to act a fool. You know what I mean? There were consequences to it. How many of these kids have actually dealt with severe consequences from the football team? Now, one of the young men dealt with very severe consequences. He lost his life. Just tragic. And this still happens. Why? Because this clearly has not been made a priority by Kirby Smart and his staff. I mean, how many of these guys that have done these type of things, like this is like, look, here's the thing about speeding and reckless driving. It's bad enough you're putting your own life at risk, but you're putting other people around you's life at risk. It's like drunk driving. They're like, well, you know, that's your personal choice. I don't know. It's not. Look, first of all, if you want to do dumb things to put yourself at risk, fine, whatever. But once that dumb thing that puts your life at risk starts, in fact, it puts other people's lives at risk, that's no longer just a personal decision. And so like you're speeding, like what if God forbid some little kid is chasing a ball and you know what I mean? Like who knows what's going to happen? Somebody's dog's running out in the middle of the road. You know what I mean? Like you just don't know. It's so irresponsible. It's so disgusting that Kirby Smart allows this. And you guys want to know why I don't talk highly of Kirby Smart other than football? It's crap like this. How does this keep happening? And it won't change until Kirby starts saying, hey, guys, there's consequences to this. But at this point in time, you've had, 30-some guys arrested the last 3 years? He doesn't care. As long as they keep winning games. Now, I'll tell you this. The minute he starts losing games, the boosters at Georgia are going to raise a big fuss about it. And they're going to use that to oust him if he starts losing games. You know, it's kind of like, who was the coach? Brian Kelly. When, you know, like all these things, we know Brian Kelly's done some real shady stuff in 3 years at LSU. Real shady stuff. And I haven't even shared some of it with you, Trev. Nobody said anything about it until this year when he started losing. Now they want to fire him for cause. Oh, he did this. Well, yeah, you knew that in year 1. But you didn't care. So they'll care when he starts losing. And that's the reality of it. But it's pretty gross. It's pretty gross.
Yeah, it's bad. There's just no accountability anywhere within the program, and it starts from the top down. And honestly, now that it's been such an epidemic of issues at Georgia, it's now the issues just stem outside of the football program even. I mean, now this is starting to this has to be a reflection on the school. I guess there's some like street racing culture down in just Atlanta, and that's where a lot of these kids get in trouble and get entrenched in it. Not defending it. It's just I think that's the causality of it, I'm assuming.
But you've got to know that if that's the reality, and you've got to make sure that these players understand you do this, you're putting your future at jeopardy. But you know what's sad about it, Trev? Even if Kirby was to do that, you know what those kids would do? Fine, let's transfer somewhere else and go make a bunch more money somewhere else.
It's the sad truth.
Yeah.
But then at least the program wouldn't have as much of a dark looming shadow over it.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
Another one from Tommy. Do you think we'll see more dime personnel and obvious passing downs this year?
Possibly. I could definitely see Notre Dame in some situations going with like a 3-2 type of look and maybe getting like Luke Talich down as sort of like a third linebacker type of guy. and doing some of those looks. I could see that. Or even like, yeah. Yep.
From Salty, what is your current assessment of the two 2027 quarterbacks just offered by Notre Dame?
So I like them both. Camden Lapati's the kid from Utah. He's committed to Illinois. He's blown up a lot lately. I know Michigan offered him after Notre Dame did. He's had some other big offers. I like him. He's 6'3", 210-ish, real live arm. He's a real easy passer, Trev. I don't know if you had a chance to watch him play, but like he's just kind of like going through the motions. He doesn't have he doesn't really ramp it up, and the ball just comes out of his hand, like just explodes out of his hand. Think he's a really talented player. Good runner too. He had like 600 yards or about rushing this year. Had 10 touchdown passes, and really good player. The kid from Davin McDavidson, the kid from Florida, he's a high school teammate of Elijah Golden. His high school coach is Jared Clark, former Notre Dame player. He's more raw. He's 6'6", 215. Plays a lot off platform, a lot off script. He'll run right, throw left. He does a lot of stuff off script. The ball doesn't explode quite out of his hand the way that I would like in certain situations, because I think he's still developing the technique. But there's times, Trev, when he's on the run and he lets a rip and that sucker launches because he's using his core when he's throwing on the run. And you're like, when his technique catches up to his just body, I think you're going to see that ball really start to jump out of his hands. So, and there's times when he will drive and you can just see it jump off a lot different. Like, okay, the tools are there, but he's still young. He's still learning. They didn't ask him to carry that team this year, which was smart, and they just let him be an athlete. I think you'll see him now going into this next year, develop that. They're both very good players. I also like Champ Mons, a big, thick kid, strong-armed kid. I'd take any of the three I'd be happy with. And I think we'll see them continue to expand the board a little bit. But I'd be happy with any of those guys at this point in time. And I'm going to have some breakdowns over the next month or so of I'm start breaking down the 27 class on the board. So I'll have even more of those, but I'll certainly get to the quarterbacks pretty soon.
Hopefully we'll get to see some of them at Irish Invasion this year.
That'd be nice. Let's get some, because we saw 28 kids, Neiman Lawrence and
Trayvon Towns, right?
Yes, yes, bro. Really talented kids. Neiman Lawrence has one of the prettiest arms in the country right now in high school, regardless of class. He's just a really natural passer.
From Salty, should a pass that contacts the receiver but is not secured and then is caught by a defender be counted as an interception?
Yes. I get why, but then you'd have to say, well, what about a pass that gets tipped and gets caught by a receiver? Does that not count as a catch?
Yeah.
Like remember the play against Michigan State in 06, and it hit off a receiver's hand and then flies up in the air, and I think it was like John Carlson catches it down the field. You remember that play?
Yep.
That's still a catch. I would understand if it was like, okay, hits a guy in the chest. And when I played, my answer to this would have been different than it is now. When I played, heck yeah, man, if I hit the guy, hit your hand, you should catch it. It shouldn't be it shouldn't be on me. But no, I mean, it should be, because at the end of the day, it's a team stat more so than a player stat. Well, it's just the context. You got to evaluate the play and say, hey, guy threw 2 picks. He sucked. Well, okay, did you see the picks or did you just look at the stat line? That it's more of an evaluation problem than it is a statistical problem, in my opinion.
Yeah, and then you start getting into the waters of like, okay, if you don't count it as an interception, like what do you count it as a fumble? But right. It's like the receiver never had possession. It opens up a whole can of worms. As a former quarterback, I would hate when that would happen, because it would, be a blemish on something that I didn't like. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you, man.
Then I believe this is going to be our last question, unless some people get some more questions in. But this is a question from Aaron Valerio.
What offensive lines will Notre Dame play in the regular season that could give the D-line issues?
You did a breakdown on this, or have you got to the offensive line yet, Trev?
Yeah. The offensive line breakdown is out. I'm pulling it up just to give myself a refresher, because I published it while I was on vacation.
I think Miami's offensive line is going to be a little better than some people think by the time they get to Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Because I think Samson Okunlola will have a lot more experience under his belt. Jackson Cantwell, if he starts, will. I think their line by November is going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I think they will. SMU is going to have a really good offensive line. They have some questions to shore up on the left side. Their left tackle and their left guard is gone, but center to right tackle are all back. And I think those were their 3 best offensive linemen in 2025. So very interested to see what they do. Couple of sleepers in here. Stanford and Navy have 2 pretty veteran offensive lines. They returned 4 of their 5 starters from this past season. Now, is it a situation like Ohio State where it's like, yeah, they returned 4 of their 5 starters, but their offensive line last year was meh? Be very interested with a team like Stanford. How does the new coaching staff help develop this younger talent that's on or the veteran talent that's on the roster? Did they get them to play as a more cohesive unit? To your point, Miami has a very wide range that they could be. I think by the time November 7th rolls around, that could be a legitimate unit. I do.
Mm-hmm.
But only returning Matthew McCoy is interesting.
Like Ryan Rodriguez has played a lot, and Sampson played a decent amount last year. Like he would rotate in. And that's why, like, if you're going to get to that offensive line, you're going to want to get to that offensive line early.
Yeah.
By the time you get to your point, Trev, by the time you get to November, I think that offensive line is going to be pretty good. I think they had some guys this past year that got it. I mean, Matthew McCoy 605 snaps, but Samson Okunlola played 493 snaps last season. It's kind of part of that rotation. Ryan Rodriguez played 93 last year, but he's a guy that has played. He was actually going to start for them in 2024, but he got injured. But he comes into the year with 261 career snaps. So you're not complete neophytes, but it's one thing to rotate in, and it's another thing you're the guy, and you got to play 1,000 snaps this year. That's a little bit of a different deal. But I thought Sampson filled in well when his number was called, and he was a former elite big-time recruit, man. Like, I loved him coming out of high school. He would not give Notre Dame the time of day coming out. I mean, he just wouldn't. But look, any offensive line that replaces as much as they replace is going to take time to come together. But Notre Dame, like, this would be the year you'd want to play Miami in the opener. Last year, I would have wanted to play them in November. Let Notre Dame be the team that kind of, gets some time to develop and grow. Notre Dame would work this offense and defensive line in week 1. But by November 7th, to your point, Trev, as you said, they're going to be a much better offensive line by the end of the year than they will be in August and September.
Yeah.
And they're going to have some talent, no doubt. So, but, got to coach it up, right? But that's a place where you got 2 pretty good offensive. Somebody in the chat just said it, actually. Daily Comments, who seems to change his name daily. But he talked about you don't doubt Mario Cristobal and Alex Mirabel. Absolutely correct. Like, that's the thing. They're good evaluators and good teachers, but I don't care who you are. Harry Hiestand in 2020, it took them 3-4 games before the offensive line started to gel with Harry Hiestand.
Yeah, 100%.
You just don't do it in game 1. And that's why I'm saying it's going to take some time, but that won't affect them against Notre Dame because that doesn't happen until what's that game, like 9 or 10 for them? 9. I think it's 8 or 9 for them. So, yeah, they'll be there. They'll be there.
Well, good deal.
What's this one? Top 3 picks for the D-line U from ND Milton fan. Bama was there for a while. They haven't produced like they used to.
Georgia's probably up there currently with
Ohio State.
Put out. Yeah.
The Bosa's, Chase Young. Obviously had a lot of picks last year. I'd put them in there. Who else would be in D-line U? Michigan was there for a couple. Was creeping up for a couple years. I think.
Yeah, Chase Winovich, Rashawn Gary, Aiden Hutchinson.
Yeah, and then you had Chris Jenkins. I think was a high pick last year. Derek Morgan will get picked relatively high this year. And then they had there was who's the other D-line U? I'd have to think about that one. Those are the top 2 those are the ones that come to my mind: Ohio State and Alabama, Georgia. But I don't know that I put Alabama in that one anymore.
Not anymore.
Not since Saban's gone. Who'd be the other one? Let's type that into. Let's type this in. Let's type in college football. See what comes up. College football D-line U. Who are the?
You could talk about Clemson, but they kind of fizzled out around the same time. That Alabama did.
They had if we're doing this conversation 5-6 years ago, Clemson is definitely in that conversation.
Yeah.
So here's 2023. It was Alabama 1, Florida State 2, Ohio State 3, Clemson 4, Penn State 5. Penn State was in there for a while, last couple of years. Actually, they're still producing high draft picks. I don't know if I'd put them in there yet. Texas 6, LSU 7, USC 8, Georgia 9, Michigan 10. That was in 2023. I think Florida State's last couple of years.
Yeah.
I can't put them in there anymore. And same with Alabama. Yeah, I don't know who my third would be. I don't know.
Yeah, I'd probably just just recently, I'd probably just go like a safe Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State. That's it.
If you look at like the last 5-6 years.
Yeah. And if somebody wanted to debate Clemson over Bama, I'm sure, because now this draft they'll have Peter Woods and TJ Parker for what that's worth. So yeah, we'll probably be in contention.
It's a good one. All right, Trev, now that, my friend, will do it.
Well, folks, another fun show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast. IB Nation Sports Beat goes live here in about an hour, 10 or so minutes. It's going to be a more abbreviated show because I believe the Lady Irish tip off tonight at 6 p.m. against Wake Forest, traveling out to Winston-Salem in a game where the Lady Irish are favored by 17.5 points by our friends over on FanDuel. So going to want to go and check them out.
I know that win out. They've got to come close to winning out. I think they can only afford maybe one more loss in the regular season and to really be in a good position. But they went out, end on a hot streak. Get some momentum going into the ACC tournament would be nice.
Very interested to see what they do tonight. That is for sure.
That NC State win, real quick, was huge for them.
Yeah,
huge for them because NC State's ahead of them in the rankings. They needed that kind of big win, and that was a big one to get for sure.
Huge.
Sorry, just couldn't help myself. But that was
you're good.
Massive win for them, dude. Massive win. Hopefully they can build on that.
Hopefully,
stretch. Yeah.
Bryan and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the Friday Free for All mailbag. So be sure to bring your questions, comments into that show tomorrow. It starts at 1 p.m. On your way out of here, folks, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell. Share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that you know loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do, whatever streaming platform you listen to us on, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. But as always, best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. You see it scrolling down there at the bottom of your screen. So until next time, that's Bryan. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.